Ex-cons. What's the saddest thing you've seen in prison? As a kid, I went to juvie, or kid jail, for accidentally setting some woods on fire. It was a bonfire out of control situation. My cellmate was only a few years older than me. He was a super nice, laid-back guy. We got along great and even sort of became friends while there. I was just a kid, so I didn't really ask any questions about different colors of jumpsuits and people's reasons for being there. The day I got out, I found out he was in there for murder. Apparently, he got really tired of his stepdad bullying him, and he remedied the situation. I never really knew all of the details, but I can tell you that when talking to him, he seemed like a good kid at heart. He had things and people that he cared about, things he wanted to do, interests. The guards obviously must have known, but they were always super nice to him, noticeably so, even more than the inmates. I always wondered what happened to that guy. A kid like that I don't see as a murderer. He was a kid probably being put in a horrible home situation and didn't know what to do. Kids can't just leave and go find another family. Of course, he committed a crime and should be accountable, but I find it sad when I hear about kids like this. It's like women who kill their terrible spouses who take them prisoner in their houses and stuff. He probably felt safer and more comfortable in prison. I'd be interested in finding out where he is. As for you, young man, setting fires? I really hope you learned your lesson. I knew a guy who was very kind and in prison for just a parole violation because he stole something. He was a homeless guy, a bit goofy and had schizophrenia or something, but a really nice guy. Anyway, he got sent to Seg for some reason and the guards ended up beating him to death there. I believe the guards who did it are in prison themselves now. Can't believe that happened. Rest in peace, Larry. A 57-year-old man on a life sentence, high on spice, which is a synthetic psychoactive substance, was crawling around on the floor screaming because he could see his dead mother towering over him, looking at him in disgust. Not a pleasant thing to see, especially when you're stuck in a cell with him. It's a wild herb. Doing the same substance I've mentioned above, a 22-year-old man ended up flooding his cell, setting it on fire and passing away 2 months before finishing his sentence. Another one is where a guy mutilated himself and again set fire to his cell because the substance made him think that getting hard was evil. So yeah, stay away from spice. Okay, let's add that one to the list of substances that realistically the narrator was probably never going to take anyway. So a little redundant, but on the off chance someone's handing out synthetically spliced green herb at the local bowling club, I know to stay clear. Also, there's some pretty messed up stuff involving self-deletion and a variety of uncomfortable themes coming up, so you've been warned, guys. I mean, it's a video about prison, so go figure. I knew a guy who was never in trouble in his life. He was working in the automotive industry in Michigan and lost his job. He fell behind with child support payments and ended up doing time in jail. His very first night, his 2 cellmates got into an argument because one of them couldn't find his bear claw snack. They finally stopped arguing and went to sleep. Then, in the middle of the night, he was woken up by the guy beating the guy he accused of theft up. His cellmate literally beat the guy to death. Apparently, he had gotten a hold of some kind of pole or stick, and the entire cell was just covered in blood. They ended up finding out that the guy he had accused of stealing didn't steal it after all. I'll never forget the fear and look in that guy's eyes when he told me what happened. I went to county for about a week in the middle of nowhere, Kansas, on a substance charge. I was 19 years old, scared out of my mind. It was a room with about 4 communal picnic benches, and 2 rooms on either side with about 6 bunks on them. I noticed one was full and the other had just one guy there. So not understanding the situation at all, I went over to the empty bunks and a guy grabbed my shoulder and just gave me a hard look that said no, but without saying a word. I then noticed the other prisoners were camped out in the corners on their mattress. I did the same. Found out not long after that the solo guy was in for a crime against a young person. I've never heard such a beatdown as I heard that night. I just covered my ears and stared at the wall. How did I get here? And the sobbing and pleading. I was bonded out the next day. This was in 1992, my spring break of college freshman year. I was driving out to visit a friend of mine in Wichita. I never had to serve time. This was my first offense, had a good lawyer. I'm a college kid, so I got extremely lucky. Your story is exactly what happened to my ex. We were busted for green herb. He screwed up one of his screens during probation and ended up in county, but for months until a court date. No bond. It was horrible for a number of reasons, but for him, being a laid-back Lebowski kind of guy, listening to a similar character being beaten in the middle of the night was disturbing on a number of levels. Hanging out one day in the law library, all of a sudden some guy who was fresh came in minding his own business and just started reading something. One of my boys who was also in there, mind you, I'd been locked up for over a year at this point with this guy, and he was chill and in there for dealing, This guy got up, walked over to the fresh guy, and beat the living F out of him. Like, not just knocked him out, I'm saying literally beat the life out of the guy. Blood flying everywhere. The other guy was on the ground and the assailant just kept going. I got up and just stepped back and watched so I wouldn't get jumped by the COs when they came in. They literally dragged his lifeless body away and cuffed the guy I knew. I saw him once before I got out and I asked him what the frick had happened that day. All he said was, "I just kinda felt like messing someone up." Needless to say, I've had serious trust issues since then, and since being locked up in general. Seeing that other guy get destroyed in front of me for no reason was pretty effed. My brother had 3 gold teeth. They were ripped out in the first few months of being in prison. He said he lost them in a fight, but a guard told us that he was probably held down and had them forcefully pulled out, judging by the damage to his gums. A 17-year-old kid was in my block. His name was Israel. He had been kicked out of his grandma's house a few months prior for doing substances, so he was living on the streets. He got picked up for package theft. He was only in for 30 days, but he was enjoying every minute of it, because he was young and a generally good guy and people were looking out for him. I taught him how to play spades. At the end of the 30 days, he didn't want to get out. He didn't want to go back to life on the street with no food. He was planning on doing something to get himself back in there, but I tried convincing him that's not where he wanted to be. I told him he needed to go talk with his grandma, quit doing substances, and try to get a job to help pay her bills and keep him out of trouble so he could get his own place sometime soon. I mean, he heard me, but I doubt he was listening. If I had to guess, he probably got himself locked up again, but I sure hope not. There was a guy whose girlfriend broke up with him while he was inside. So just before he walked out to lunch, he made incisions and ended things. His cellmate had to explain to the officer that he didn't do it, the guy did it to himself. I was working on servery, so I was out of my cell every day, all day. One day I was told by the screw to check on the cells on the ground floor. I opened one of the door flaps, and this guy, he was standing in the middle of the room with his shirt off, crying, then proceeded to make a series of cuts. Called help, and he made it. But not long after that, he strung himself up somewhere anyway. I was serving 3 to 5 years for conspiracy to fraud and aggravated violence. I ended up serving 2 years in Arizona for good behavior and participation. I didn't do it, lawyers screwed me, as said in Shawshank Redemption. I was in with someone, let's call him Carlos, and he was up for a review and serving a dime, and he got a new roomie who tried to clap his cheeks. Carlos felt like he had no chance but to stick him, and he added another 5 years to his term when he was likely going to be free that year. From what we understand, he did tell the guards and review board that he was defending himself from being a victim of the unspeakable act, but not sure what the outcome was other than he added more time. Okay, update. I just asked my boy who stayed in the same block with Carlos about his release date, and Carlos did in fact get out on time in 2017. The roommate who tried to take advantage had a reputation and many other DAs in his paperwork about other such offences in prison, which came into play for his review. A guy we worked out with found out that his dad went on a spree against his whole family and then jumped off the mortal coil himself. He went to his cell for a while, and after like 40 minutes, he was screaming for help. Stumbled out of his cell in a state that I honestly don't know how he made it into without going unconscious or passing away earlier. Blood everywhere. He didn't make it more than a few steps out of his cell before falling and going unresponsive. This is going to be one of those videos that I don't feel good about for some time, I can tell. I don't know what you can take away from this one, folks. Don't end up in prison if you don't want to see stuff every other week that will haunt you forever, I guess. My ex-boyfriend was in jail for almost 3 years. I used to visit him every Saturday. There were lots of families in there, in the visitation room. Imagine a sort of warehouse with little tables and chairs. There was this woman that would sometimes visit her husband and service him under the table. Sometimes she'd sit on his lap and they'd just not so subtly do the deed, otherwise fully clothed for a while, right next to other family members. I'll never forget those faces, staring at the wall, trying to ignore what their parents or siblings were doing. The guards would mostly just ignore it because the guy was apparently a big-shot dealer and had lots of influence. It was absolutely disgusting and humiliating for everyone involved. My ex would scold me for staring at them with disgust. He didn't want to get in trouble with that guy. It was so messed up. Not as messed up as some of the other stories here, but it broke my heart to see younger relatives in those situations. There was a person who went to prison and cried all the time. He never spoke, but after a while it became clear that the officers forced him to confess that he'd killed a person, otherwise the officer threatened very horrible violence on that guy's family in front of his eyes. He confessed and received a life sentence. We live in a very conservative and corrupt country. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Did my time from 2018 to 22. Being Asian, it's so few of us on certain yards, and I ended up being cellmates with the only other Vietnamese guy on the yard. He was a lifer who was never going home and took me in like a little brother. I usually get a mail from family, but this one time I saw the letter and it was for him. Excitedly handing him the letter, he was in shock that it was for him. As he read the letter, his face said it all, and it was clear that it wasn't a good one. He later tells me that he'd reached out to his uncle to see his mum and dad's whereabouts because they're in Vietnam. His uncle told him to drop dead, how embarrassing he was to the family, they brought him to the US just to F up his life, and that he should never contact them again unless he's getting released. This guy barely spoke any English and overall was a good guy who made one grave mistake. He had a huge substance addiction that I overlooked until it got out of hand. During count time, we'd have to stand up and show our ID to the CEOs who were making their rounds. My cellmate would tell me when he's going to load up and shoot up the stuff we had, and I had no problem with it because I'm not one to judge, and this is how it is in prison. As long as I know you're not snooping through my personal belongings, you're respectful to the house and not tampering with my hygiene, everything's good. But this time, as he got squared away, he didn't clean up, and I'd already dozed off before count time happened. 4 to 5 loud knocks and I'm woken up for count time. I jump off the rack and notice my cellmate was literally slumped over the stool, like how you see homeless people who are strung out on smack. The COs know exactly what's going on, but would rather look the other way than typing up a 115 disciplinary report. Anyways, I look over at our table and there it was. The stuff he was taking as well as all the equipment to do so, syringe, cotton, ball and spoon. That alone can land you 5 to 10 extra years in prison, plus dead time in the SHU. After that, I tried explaining to him if he doesn't clean up his act, then I'm going to have to move out of the cell. I want to make it home, and he couldn't let go. Fast forward 2 to 3 months later, friends on the yard are telling me how my ex-cellmate is very sad and hasn't been acting the same since I left the cell. At the time, he had no family support, letters or phone calls, so I'd taken him in, took care of him and let him talk to my mum on the phone, because we're from the same area and Vietnamese. Also that he could have some sense of family. COVID-19 struck the world, and inside prison was an absolute hellhole. We went 4 to 5 months of straight lockdown, no phone calls or mail coming in or out. No clue what's going on, all because the COs are all afraid, calling off work and refusing to take the vaccination. Some were, some weren't. Long story short, my cellmate ended up being patient 0 and had COVID first on the yard. He was completely isolated in a different unit alone with other people who also caught the virus. Typical day in the prison compound, an alarm goes off while we're all in lockdown. Everyone thinks it's a fight breaking out in a different unit. 3 to 4 hours later, a CO comes up to my cell, and I'm thinking it's a cell extraction and I brace myself to get raided. He pulls me out and tells me that my ex-cellmate was found dead. He braided up the bed sheets, looped it between the AC unit, dropped to his knees and started spinning, and eventually passed. My heart broke in half and I cried in the cell. Of course, some people in prison are pieces of crap and made fun of the matter, and I ended up smashing this guy at our break room for making fun of my cellmate's self-deletion, and I ended up with 6 months in the SHU along with extra time for inciting a riot. Additional year along with the dead time of 6 months. I found out that they resuscitated him back to life. He was dead for about 25 minutes and is now in a medical yard that has him on life support for the past 2 years. The state can't pull the plug unless the family gives permission to kill off their loved ones, but they tried to get in contact with him. Too little too late. I pray for his soul and his family's well-being till this day. Rest easy, brother. Life after death will be graceful and may you be reunited with your family when the time comes. I'm an ex-CEO. I had an inmate who got some bad news in the form of his mother passing right as it turned Christmas Day. It was midnight and we wouldn't be serving chow for a good long while, and the day rooms were clear of all inmates, so it was a tad odd to have to escort a guy down to the lieutenant's office. I was dismissed as soon as we arrived, and he was sent back alone. This guy was a troublemaker, always acting disrespectful to both us and the other inmates. When he returned, I figured I was going to have hell putting him back in. Instead, he calmly walked back to his cell, never said a word, and didn't even look around. We checked on him multiple times and nothing happened on my shift. Found out when I came back in the next day that he'd finished things in his cell with a towel as a rope while his cellie was at rec and the officers were busy in another wing. I remember the worst part was getting the call to escort him down, because when they called, it had just turned from Christmas Eve to Christmas Day. So for Christmas, he got another night in prison and lost his mother. Had a stint in juvie back during COVID. A 13-year-old girl was the only other person I could talk to since her intake day was the same as mine. Social distancing BS. My god, her story was intense. But to cut it short, she was in there because of a brutal fight with her junkie mum. She had two choices: lose her only family member to jail and have to go into foster care, or lie and take the fault so she'd be the one locked up. It genuinely almost brought me to tears. Well, yeah, that girl was better than either of her parents deserved, obviously. I'm 100% certain that her mother was in no way grateful for the second chance she got, either. There was a guy on the yard convinced he was going to be transformed into a chicken for his crimes later in life. Crazy, really? I worked in a prison for about 2 years as an administrator. A lot of sad stuff happens all the time. Many times the inmate's family visits turn out into a big shouting event, and the inmate goes back to their room feeling depressed because that was the first time in months they'd seen their family. There was one time where a guy was waiting for his mother and sister to visit him. The family had booked half-an-hour time slot and the guy was in the waiting room, but they never turned up. I actually saw tears in his eyes as the visiting hours were over and he was told to go back. Our prison also conducts GCSE English and math classes for inmates. One of the inmates had been doing a lot of revision and preparing for his GCSEs for almost a year, I assume. On the day of his exam, he heard that his partner had decided he didn't want to be alive anymore, and he was in too much unbearable grief to sit in the exam. He lost his partner, missed his chance to appear in the exam, and lost a bit of his mind as well. There are countless small stories that I've seen, which is extremely sad. And when I tell people about these events, there's very little sympathy towards the inmates. Two things. There was an old Italian man, transitioned from cane to wheelchair in the 4 years that I was there. Hunched over, palsy, half-blind, had BOP paid inmate caretakers to watch over him. Yep, that's a thing in federal prison. It's not inhumane, it's one of the best paying jobs you can have, actually. He was in his early 90s and dying from cancer. The feds would not grant compassionate leave because he'd been an important capo in the mafioso back in the late 70s. And no, I don't remember his name. Then there was this guy, maybe early 30s, probably high-functioning autistic. No friends, because prison is hell if you don't have at least one person to hang with. He spent all of his time listening to Catholic masses on the radio, and all of his free time either walking in the track or in the leisure library, still on the radio all the time. During visitations, his mother, who came every time as far as we could figure out, would pet him, literally pet him, stroking his arm or hair or back. You could tell it was very comforting for both of them. Kinda jealous sometimes because that sort of contact wasn't permitted except the guards looked the other way for this guy. We all knew he was in there for some pretty horrific crimes, but it wasn't the sort of place some of the others here are writing about, and even if it was, even lower on that totem pole is those who prey on the helpless. And man, was this guy ever helpless. No one felt anything more than pity for him. I wasn't exactly in prison, it was the county jail. I used to have a bit of a drinking problem and landed a DUI. It was a rural-ish Wisconsin county, so like 90% of all the inmates were drunks. One guy we had in there for his 4th OWI, but he had been sober for 20 years. He got it because he had throat cancer and he was spaced out on his pain meds when he got pulled over. The cancer had eaten his larynx away, and he had to use one of those electronic wand voice boxes to talk. There was some mess-up involving the paperwork for his cancer meds, so the idiot in charge of the block wouldn't let him have any of them for the first few days. This guy was throwing up all over the place, and the rest of us inmates had to take care of him and clean up after him. Eventually, they got his meds thing figured out, and he did the rest of his time, which was about 2 months. 3 weeks after he got out, we saw his obituary in the paper. We also had a nurse who came around to give everyone their meds in the morning and evening, who quit because the officer in charge of the jail was constantly chewing her out for being too nice to the inmates. She was a really sweet younger lady, I think relatively fresh out of med school. Basically, she thought that we were already at a low point in our lives, so we deserved some kindness. And the officer didn't agree and started giving her a hard time about anything he could. I think the incident with the cancer guy was the last straw for her. I was once stood up for a visit. My friend had booked it and didn't show. So I had to wait in the holding cells whilst everyone else went on their visits. After an hour, a guy from my area came back off his visit looking visibly shaken and upset. He went on to tell me that his girlfriend and mother to his kids had just told him she had terminal cancer. Sadly, she died not long after this. This was like 12 years ago. To make matters worse, the guy's face popped up on my Facebook the other week as he was murdered. Made me think of those kids, possibly adults now, who were parentless. Guy told me after he was arrested that all he could think about were his dogs. Said the police didn't care when he told them that his dogs were home alone and that he really hopes someone he knows or a neighbor will check on them, but he couldn't get a hold of anyone. It broke my heart. Poor puppies. During COVID, we used to be on lockdown a lot, so phone use was spotty. Anyway, I heard a dude on the phone talking to his people, asking about his mum who had contracted COVID. His people told him she was gone, and he couldn't believe it because he'd talked to her 2 days before. The anguish and the way he broke down while on the phone was sad. He couldn't even stand up anymore. What absolute shenanigans did your goofy dad get up to? I am a Bengali, and as all good Bengalis, we went to see tigers in the north of Bengal. Spoiler alert, no tigers. After one pretty disappointing day of missing 2 elephant herds and seeing no wild cats, much less a tiger, we stop at a dried-up riverbed. We're freaking tired, the sun is setting, the peacocks are screaming, the usual where we're from. Suddenly, we hear a growl. Monkeys are going nuts, the telltale signs of a tiger nearby. The guide tells us to rush to our jeeps. We oblige, but just before boarding, I see my dad smirking hard. After an hour of waiting, we see no tigers and we head home. The next morning, while everyone is freaking out over the growl, Dad pulls me aside and says it was a burp. A freaking burp. So I can proudly say that once my dad burped so hard that the jungle thought it was a tiger. One time, my dad waited till my 3 siblings and I had gone to bed on Christmas Eve. Then he shouted, "I don't care who you are, fat man, get that sled off my roof." We were all up and telling Dad not to yell at Santa. My dad was a fireman and picked me up from school in a fire engine once. My dad was also a fireman and we kind of took it for granted. All of the other kids thought it was awesome, but we were just used to it, I suppose. He treated it like a job and we did too. Until we went on family vacation and saw a vehicle overturn ahead of us in a terrible accident. Watching my father spring into action and quickly take control and begin rescuing the family made me look at him in an entirely different way. Afterwards, he got in our car and we continued our vacation. He said, "I think they're going to be alright." And that was that, but we knew Dad was a total badass. One day my dad answered the door in his underwear at 8 a.m. The salesman was obviously weirded out. After he left, my mum was mortified and asked why he did that. My dad said, "If these people don't want a show, they shouldn't have come for the matinee." One time we went to Universal Studios and my dad took me on the Hulk roller coaster even though he knew it would make him sick. I was afraid of roller coasters at that point and he sacrificed himself because he knew I'd never go on a ride without him. When we got off, his face was completely colorless and his stomach was done working correctly for the rest of the day. But I loved the roller coaster. When I was walking out to the car to leave for college, my dad yelled, "Hey!" from the front door, and I turned around. He takes out this huge box of magnum-sized rubbers and throws them at me as hard as he can. They hit me in the nose and he yells, "Care package," and then ran inside laughing. That's very flattering, Dad, but I don't think I'll have much use for them. There are some questions that I feel have to follow up, like, do you not have much use for them because you're not interested, or female, or because you have a teeny tiny dingaling? And if it's the latter, don't worry, you can just drop them on the ground in front of your crush, along with a $100 note and loudly proclaim that you dropped them to demonstrate value. I didn't see my dad much. He lived 80 miles away and was getting his life together. I tried to see him once a month for a weekend. I'd bring my homework and spend a few days with him. I was sitting at his computer while he was watching TV in the same room, and he turns to me and asks if I want to see something. He retrieves a cardboard box from his closet and sets it on my lap, and I open it. Staring at me in the face is a 15-inch, giant, girthy, purple marital aid. I look up to him with a confused expression, and he laughs out with a Cheshire grin. I'm going to make a lamp out of it. We laugh about it for the rest of the weekend, making dumb jokes. It was fun. But soon I leave for home and I forget about the jokes and the toy. So I return a month later, open the door to his apartment to see all of the walls had a faint purple hue. Looking down, I see this giant glowing purple Johnson suction-cupped to my dad's coffee table. I dropped my bags, slack-jawed as he steps up behind me and claps twice, and the lamps turn off. My dad had made a manhood-shaped lamp and then given it the clap. One time, my older brother and I were helping my dad cut down some trees in the backyard, and the chainsaw kind of stuck and my dad yanked it out a little too hard and hit my brother's leg. We all froze and looked at his jeans, which had 4 or so perfectly spaced holes, but no blood. He had managed to hit my brother's pants, but didn't get in far enough to hit flesh. The next words out of his mouth were pretty obvious. "Don't tell your mother." And we still haven't 20 years later. One time, just before I graduated high school, my dad sat me down to have a serious conversation about socializing in college. It turned into him telling me a bunch of crazy party stories and suggesting that the best way to make friends is to own a blender with a 100-foot extension cord, because his friends would go outside to play basketball or whatever, and he'd bring his blender out with them and make margaritas. We met so many girls because of that blender. People like the guy with the blender. My dad is a super serious and straight-laced man most of the time, and it totally caught me off guard. One time, I asked my dad to rent The Notebook for me from the good old family video up the street, and he rented Nacho Libre because he could only remember it started with an N. One time, my dad literally took candy from a baby. A 2-year-old held up a lollipop, and my dad assumed the kid was giving it to him. After taking it and walking away, he realized that the toddler was probably just wanting to show it to him. At least that's what he told us. Maybe my dad just wanted an excuse to take the candy. One time, my dad took my brother's walkie-talkie and had us and about 10 kids in the neighborhood convinced that we'd picked up a signal from a plane that was crashing towards the earth. We were running up and down the streets for an hour with our eyes on the sky listening as the pilot tried to reach someone for help. Dad's windows were open, so we eventually caught on to the heinous laughter echoing between the houses after every Mayday. So Michigan doesn't allow the good sort of fireworks, but Indiana does. So every June, my dad would drive across the border and pick up a trunkful. One rather inebriated 4th of July, he reached in the back, pulled out what appeared to be an oversized confetti popper, and aimed it at the tree before pulling the trigger. It was not a party popper, it was his emergency flare. It got stuck towards the top of the tree and turned the whole neighborhood orange. The cops in my hometown wouldn't really turn out for reports of the good fireworks unless someone lit a car on fire or something, but they will definitely turn out en masse for an emergency flare. Dad went from drunk to drill sergeant in about 2 seconds. Somehow we managed to shove the entire stock of the good fireworks into the garage and used snow shovels to push the husks of the used ones into the parking lot across the street. When the 3 police cars and the fire and rescue truck showed up, us kids were playing with sparklers and Dad was standing with his hands on his hips, scowling at the tree. Why, yes, officer, some punks were across the street lighting off Roman candles and huge fountains. And then they just ran off when one of their tricks got stuck in a tree. He was just about to call when they ran off. Don't they know that Roman candles are dangerous? They could have hit one of the kids. About 5 years ago, my dad accidentally cut 3 of his fingers off in our garage with a saw. My niece was only like 5 months old at the time, so growing up, she's never seen my dad with all of his digits. Anyway, when she was about 2.5, she noticed that one of his hands was different. So, one day she asked him, "Grandpappy, what happened to your fingers?" My dad looked down at his hand, all shocked, and said, "Someone stole them!" Her face had the look of pure horror, and she screamed, "Who stole your fingers?" My dad looked at my mum and said, "Grandmummy stole them." My niece ran up to my mum and started beating on her legs, searching her jean pockets to give her back Grandpappy's fingers. My dad, ladies and gentlemen. One time, my dad was sitting on the couch in our living room. Mum brought out a bag of sugar and asked him to open it. He opened it like it was a bag of Doritos, and I mean, it was everywhere. He was only wearing his shorts, so there was sugar in just about every square inch of his visible hair, as well as all over our carpet and couch. Took him 4 showers in a row to get it all off. This is the only feasible way for the narrator to ever be a sugar daddy to someone. Also, bags of sugar aren't hard to open. They're not even in plastic packaging most of the time. What was going on here? One time, my dad made me drive 3 hours from home to visit a nature preserve. He then began taking pictures of the birds there. Just one problem, the birds were plastic. Turns out the flocks had stopped migrating back to the preserve, so they put up plastic birds for tourists. The funniest part was how long it took him to listen to me telling him they were plastic. When I was 17, my crush arrived to pick me up to go hang out. He didn't come to the front door, he just honked from the driveway. So my dad got a bit mad at him. That's not how you treat a lady. Honking is unacceptable. And he didn't let me go out. He brought up that scenario repeatedly for years as a baseline for how my dates should treat me. He hated that guy. I got married a few years later, and my husband died a few years into our relationship. A few years after he died, I was joking with my dad about the guy honking his horn, and my dad looks at me and says, "Wait, that was the same guy?" Yes, Dad, that was the same guy. He'd never realized that I'd married the honking guy. I didn't know that he didn't know. My kids love that story, it's pretty hilarious. When the new Star Wars movies came out, we were in elementary school. My dad's company had booked the whole theater to see it on opening day, so we got to leave school early to see it. My dad dressed up as Darth Vader, full costume with helmet and lightsaber, and snuck into our classroom and came up behind us saying, "Gimme." I am your father. At the time, I don't think it was possible to be more embarrassed, but now I think it's pretty hilarious of my dad to do that. Me and a few of my friends used to hold poker night each week, which my dad used to play too. He got particularly drunk one night and was getting on his bicycle to go home. It was icy outside and we spent around 15 minutes trying to persuade him to have a lift from one of my friends. He refused. 10 minutes later, there's a knock on the front door and there he is with blood dripping down and covering half his face. All he said was, "I fell over." He then came in and fell over again, washed his face and went to sleep on the couch. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. One time, my dad crapped his jeans on the side of the road on the way to my volleyball tournament. We were running late for the tournament, so he threw the pants in the woods, had dress pants in the car. He walked around the tournament all day in a red volleyball sweatshirt and pinstripe dress pants. One time, when I was younger and embarrassed about my body and potential dirty words, my dad made up a song about ding-dongs and ladybits and sung it any opportunity he could just to embarrass me. One time, my dad was on a business trip and he ended up getting upgraded to first class. He ended up talking with this guy seated near him for a majority of the flight. Turned out that guy was Usher. One time, my dad made a remote control car and put me as a toddler on it and drove me around. One time, my dad was riding his bike on a 3-foot-tall brick wall, slipped off, hit his head on it, and got knocked out behind it for an hour or so. My grandma almost called the cops to file him missing. He also tried to see how far he could pee into a urinal, apparently about 10 feet before he got caught by a teacher walking into the bathroom. He also dared his best friend to throw a full milk carton at a teacher. His friend did it. That teacher was also my grandma's best friend at the time. Him and my uncle were throwing snowballs at cars passing on the highway. They hit an undercover detective. They ran back to the house, and while my aunt didn't show, they snuck back in and she had to talk to the detective. He also stole my aunt's VW Beetle and took it for a midnight joyride. They stuck it in a ditch and had a farmer pull it out with a tractor. She just found out last year, nearly 40 years later. He really likes car horns. When we were kids, he held down the horn on a country road until the horn gave out and was just squeaking, trying to make a noise. He recently got a new aerating trailer for his lawnmower, and he was so excited about it that he did 3 of our neighbors' yards for fun. He also got himself a Christmas present a few years back and yelled, "Yes, thank you," when he opened it. That same Christmas, my mum got him a new coffee maker, and he spent the entire night setting it up and making everyone coffee. He bought a motorcycle as a midlife crisis thing. He kept it a secret from my grandma for 3 years. A 50-year-old man hiding things from his mum. My older brother fired an arrow almost straight up in the air. It came back down right on the peak of our shed, sticking straight up and dead center. You could tell my old man was trying not to laugh while scolding us. We were having a bonfire one night and one of my brother's friends put a Mountain Dew can near the fire so it heated up slowly. When it exploded, it sounded like a mortar went off. It sent embers 40 feet into the air and 25 feet around. After regaining our senses, we could see our dad's silhouette sprinting inside the house because he thought we were getting shot at. I've never seen him move that fast. To clarify, he was already in the house, running out. Well, that's better, but nowhere near as funny as the idea of him bailing on his entire family to get to safety. Every man for himself. Best of luck, kiddos. One time, my dad saw me put a rubber band around the sink's small water hose thing that I'd specifically set up for him. But instead of saying anything, he just left it there and watched for the next victim. He laughed so hard when the older man we rented the basement to yelled out, "What the frick?" and returned with his shirt all wet. One time, I was in another room and the phone rang. I heard my dad answer the phone when a telemarketer called and they asked if he wanted his ductwork cleaned. He said, "Yes, I'd love to have my ducts cleaned." Quack, 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 and then just hung up on the guy. My dad told a telemarketer to F off once. The telemarketer called back, listed our address, and threatened to murder the whole family. The police escorted me home from school that day. One time, my dad almost ended me because he thought I was a burglar. I'd snuck downstairs for some reason. I was in the kitchen and heard him coming in, so I hid behind the kitchen counter. Heard my dad opening drawers and things. The next thing I know, he had leaned over the counter and grabbed my head and had a kitchen knife to my throat. A split second later, he realized it was me and dropped me. Then I got yelled at because he had heard me breathing. He thought I was a home intruder and I almost got into a world of pain. He was shaking from the adrenaline. As a dad now myself, I can imagine the state of mind he was in. My dad once put off going to the optometrist for 3 years. When he finally went, it turned out his right eye was in charge of looking at things far away, and his left eye only looked at things close up. Sometime during those 3 years, he became farsighted and his brain compensated. One time, my dad went to my school event in jeans, a jean shirt, and jean jacket, also known as a Canadian tuxedo. When I was a child, around 8 or 9 years old, my parents and I were vacationing in Las Vegas, staying at the MGM Grand. Downstairs in the hotel were shops and restaurants, and I had to use the bathroom. I went into the store, did my business, and then to my childlike horror, I discovered the door was stuck. The door was the type close to the floor, and there wasn't room to crawl out. I yelled for my dad, who was using the urinal, and he walks over, grabs the door, and literally yanks it off its hinges, like it was nothing. Sets the door against the wall, and we just walk out. I'll never forget it. In short, Dad ripped a stall door off the hinges because I was trapped inside. One time, my dad set someone on fire. He was standing with a group of people having a smoke. This girl walked up and asked for a light. My dad said sure. She leant in and he lit the lighter, and her hair went right into the flame, causing her hair to catch on fire. Apparently someone had a little too much hairspray. She was fine and didn't suffer any serious injuries. Dad still tells people the story to this day. One time, my dad ripped a humongous toot and killed all of the power in the neighborhood. Literally, dark. Of course, we later found out that somebody had hit a pole further up the line at that exact moment. It made perfect sense to us as kids. Dad's an electrician and has deadly gas, therefore, dark. Now I use this as an example that correlation is not causation. One time, my dad's pub in Africa was held up by 2 guys with firearms. They ran in, brandishing weapons, and one held his to my dad's head and demanded money. Everyone in the place froze up, scared that they'd somehow wind these guys up and they'd kill someone. My dad turned his head to look at the guy who had the weapon to his head and saw the little orange water nozzle at the end of the gun. So he ripped it out of the guy's hands and beat the crap out of him. The night watchman and security showed up and grabbed the other guy who tried to make a run for it and handed his butt to him as well. In short, my dad's African pub was held up by 2 guys with water pistols, so he and security beat the crap out of the would-be robbers. One time, my dad lodged a huge splinter under his fingernail. He has huge hands, and the splinter entered under his middle finger, and the tip of the splinter was poking out of his knuckle. He fell to the ground and calmly asked for needle-nose pliers. After I handed the pliers to him, he yanked the splinter out and went back to work. Hardcore as F. One time, my dad cut his leg pretty bad, so he tore my mum's shirt off, wrapped his wound, and she drove him to the hospital. He also puts coffee in his oatmeal to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. One time, my dad called the phone at my work and asked me where I was and what I was doing. This is a dark story, but I still want to tell it because it really means something to me. After my mum and dad got married, my dad would often come home very late at night, very drunk. Almost every night, he'd be too drunk to function. My dad never thought twice about his alcoholism until my mother went into labor for the first time, and he was so drunk that she had to call our next-door neighbor to drive her to the hospital. My dad was too drunk to drive his wife to a hospital to give birth to his own son. Since that moment, he's never touched a beer. A little different from some of the other delightful goofs and blokes we've had, but this is a great story about how it's never too late to improve yourself. Good on ya, former boozy dad. One time, my dad took me to my college orientation back in '98. I grew up in an urban setting and wanted to mix it up, so I decided on an undergrad school in a very rural area. Read not a lot of diversity. My dad's the best and always wants to goof around. We had this Jeep growing up that we called Little Blackie because it was, well, little and black. A running joke was that any time any of us in the family saw a similar-looking Jeep, one of us would yell, "Hey, look, it's Little Blackie. I bet you see where this is going." We're walking around campus, and sure enough, there was a Jeep parked within sight. My dad starts yelling, "Hey, look! Little Blackie! Little Blackie!" Of course, the only African-American kid on campus was walking right in front of us. My dad was oblivious and just kept right on yelling. The poor kid looked at me in disgust, and I was so very mortified, I just wanted to disappear. I ended up becoming really good friends with him later in my freshman year, and after I explained the whole story, he laughed really hard. Thank goodness. I still cringe thinking about it, though. When I was younger, I was a pretty high-level swimmer, so my mum would take me to events all over the country, leaving my dad and 10-year-old brother at home. I remember one time we went up north for a few days, just after we'd had our house insulated. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen what they do, but they essentially drill holes in your house and squirt insulation inside. It leaves loads of cream-colored spots all over the walls. Now, I remember just before we left for the event, my mum looked at my dad and said, "Make sure you paint the house." To which he replied, "Of course, dear." Fast forward 3 days, we're rolling up the drive at about midnight, towards a house that's now been floodlit. Multiple lights are now pointing at the White House with massive pink spots, with my dad and my 10-year-old brother stood on ladders covered in pink paint, looking very happy with themselves. Of course, after that, she was more specific with her instructions. She was not happy at the time, I can tell you. How did you use malicious compliance to absolutely wreck someone? My brother-in-law worked for UPS for 17 years. He was a bit of a joker and was constantly getting in trouble for coming to work with crazy hair colors or cornrows. He was a big Italian guy and was told it wasn't appropriate. It was always something, but they couldn't say anything about him wearing sunglasses. So his little rebellion was that he'd wear the most outrageous sunglasses he could think of. Ones shaped like giant red lips, guitars with the stems sticking up, purple ones with rhinestone hearts on them, anything for a laugh. After a while, people knew him by his glasses. If someone said they lived in a certain area, I'd say, "Oh, my brother-in-law is your UPS man, the guy with the crazy glasses." And their reply would almost always be something like, "Oh, John, yeah, I love that guy. He's funny." He passed away 4 years ago. He was hit by a drunk driver while he was out walking one night. When we attended his funeral, all of the guys from work came dressed in their browns with crazy sunglasses on. His best friend gave his eulogy wearing a pair of neon green glasses, 3 times the size of his face, and the pastor even borrowed John's guitar glasses when he went up to speak. After his funeral, we counted, he had over 200 different pairs. What started as him just being a pain in the butt to his boss, ended as a tribute to his character in life of always wanting to make someone else smile. My boss is a huge D-bag. All he does all day long is walk around and make sure everyone has their shirt tucked in, and generally be a negative Nelly who everyone hates. So I came into work on my birthday the other day and my friend runs up to me and yells, "Kevin, happy birthday!" right in front of my boss's office. He looks up and says, Kevin?" I'm thinking he's going to say happy birthday since he's no doubt heard her. Instead, he says, "Yeah, go ahead and tuck your shirt in, okay?" And he does the hand signal like he's tucking in an imaginary shirt. So I say, "Okay, no problem. I just have to put my stuff down real quick and I'll take care of it." So I walk over to my desk, which takes approximately 7 seconds to get to. I put my stuff down, and as I'm doing it, he comes up behind me again and says, "Kevin, I said tuck in your shirt." So I quickly tuck it in, and as he's walking literally right by me, I say, "Sorry, I just had to put my stuff down first." And he walks away like I never said a word. For the record, I work in a call center, so no customers actually ever see us. Also, this was more the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back in this situation. This guy had been steadily cutting our pay since he got the job, and everyone hated him more for that than anything. We used to have no dress code whatsoever, so the following is just a way of getting things back to the way they used to be. Immediately, I bust out my HR manual and check out the rule on tucked-in shirts. Turns out you must tuck in all shirts except a Hawaiian shirt or Gayabira shirt. So, I took my butt to Walmart and bought 10 of those motherfrickers and wore the most obnoxious Hawaiian-looking shirt the next day. The second I walked in, he looked me up and down, glared, turned around and walked away. When everyone asked why I was wearing such a ridiculous shirt, I told them about the loophole, and now half my office is wearing Hawaiian shirts and it's driving my boss crazy. All within the guidelines outlined by company policy. You know, although it does sound like your boss is just definitively a bad dude, I do have to hand it to him knowing the HR handbook so well that he immediately knew there was an exception for those shirts and just dropped it. Well done on you and your office mates for sticking it to him. A couple of friends of mine work at Walmart. They found out that kilts are well within the dress code as long as they're the correct color. Drove their managers nuts. It's been a year and absolutely no problems though. While I was in the Navy, it was recommended that I get an extensive surgery on my ankle. My command felt that I didn't deserve a bunch of time off for surgery, end quote, so they'd approve it but none of the convalescent leave. They refused to sign any paperwork. First thing I did was hit them with the regulation stating that they were required to respond to all requests within a certain amount of time. 3 days, I think. They responded with a no. So then I had Navy Legal draw up paperwork with accordance to regulations that my command would be responsible for 100% of my medical care if they didn't abide by my doctor's orders. I then let them know that that would mean that all of my medical care would then be handled by civilians and the command would be responsible for paying the bill out of their budget. They approved my surgery, convalescent leave, and convalescent leave extension. Used to work at a TV station. Absolutely awful management and horrible bosses. Complained about it to friends all the time. Some would even ask me on Facebook about my job and I'd reply, but I knew I could get fired for speaking ill of the company. So I read the HR handbook and found out as long as I don't specifically name the company, I can't be fired for it. So about a month later, I realize I can't take this crap anymore and post on Facebook how terrible my job is, never mentioning the company by name. They fire me a day later, I gladly walk out of that building and into a lawyer's office, and I got $17,800, my yearly salary. Seriously. Feels good, man. I used to work for this small-town, twice-weekly newspaper. The editor and publisher, mayor, county commissioner, and a few other people were skimming tax dollars. When I confronted my boss about it, he told me he'd blackball me if I said anything. So I went to the local television station, tipped them off, and they uncovered the story. When they won their awards, my name was added to the list of reporters. I still can't get a job as a journalist, but damn if it didn't feel good. Worked in one corporate kitchen where our GM didn't like our music, so he'd put on children's music. So we all started singing along at the top of our lungs. We won that war of attrition. Years later, in another kitchen, we had surround sound in a closed kitchen, where the uppity GM didn't like our music and started passing draconian censorship rules about the music, so we switched it to children's music for a week. Moral of the story? Never underestimate the power of a kitchen crew of misfits singing Banana Phone at the top of their lungs to fight fascism, motherfricker. Viva la Raffi! Not so much a tuck-in shirt freak situation, but here it goes. My boss went away for 3 or 4 weeks for a conference, and while he was away, a workmate and I had an idea. A George Foreman grill, and then we'd go to the deli and grab stuff for lunch. Hamburgers, lamb chops, pork steaks, stuff like that. We did this every day for over a month, and when our boss got back, he put a stop to it with the exact words, "I don't want that thing inside the office." So we took it to the shared kitchen area on our floor. We'd rented a suite. When he got angry about that and said, "I don't want it on this floor," we took it down to the underground parking area and used the power outlet at his parking space while he was out at lunch. He caught us because he was coming back from lunch with a business partner in the car with him, and we were hunched over a tiny George Foreman grill making hamburger patties. Imagine 3 IT guys crouching on the ground like cavemen in a poorly lit underground parking lot cooking hamburgers on the concrete floor. Yeah, it went over about as well as you'd think. If he didn't specifically use the words, "take that home or I'll break it and throw it in the trash," our next step was going to be to use the PowerPoint in the parking lot of the church directly opposite to the building and facing his office. Back when I was working and attending classes, I'd go straight from campus to work, getting me anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes early before my shift. On occasion, my boss would ask me to help him out with something before I'd clock on, putting something away or answering the phone. Over the span of a couple of months, this evolved from occasionally to every day your shift starts when you get here. After doing this for a couple of weeks, still clocking in at my usual 3 p.m., I decide that if I'm working for a few extra minutes each day, I'm gonna get paid for it. I did this once, and I didn't make it an hour into my shift before my boss was screaming at me and throwing down the employee handbook, saying that I'm only allowed to clock in 5 minutes before and after my scheduled shift. Needless to say, I made it a point to not check in until 5 minutes after my scheduled shift every day, no matter how early I was. Fast forward 3 months and my boss got fired. He got what was coming to him. Yep, you can't let certain bosses take the extra stuff you do for granted. I'm also of the opinion that if they need a couple of extra seconds help carrying a box or something, they can have it for free, but if they want me doing my main work duties before my shift, that counts as starting my shift early. Not my story, but a co-worker's. We worked at a water park. Supervisor was a witch who wouldn't let the lead guards at the top of the tallest slide in the park go to the bathroom. The guard at the top is radioing that he needs to take a dump, but she won't let him. Mind you, the lead guards are allowed to ride down every once in a while to make sure no tubes are stuck. The lead guard is about to crap his pants in front of a ton of guests, so he goes into the utility closet and craps in a bucket of cat litter we keep to clean up vomit. He then proceeds to ride down the slide to clean himself off and left the supervisor to clean up his bucket of crap. My father was working at a post office in the early 80s. It was an unusually hot day, 85 degrees Fahrenheit inside. There were no fans available, so it was crazy. Men weren't allowed to wear shorts, but Dad came to work wearing shorts which covered his knees and part of his shins, figuring that would be fine. It wasn't fine, and his boss sent him home to change. He returned in his grandfather's bonjour from the late 19th century, top hat and all. The boss kept asking if it wasn't a little hot in that suit, but he said he was fine. Not work, but school. I'm a senior in high school, and one day a bunch of senior guys decided to start Tank Top Tuesday. Every Tuesday, about half the senior guys would come to school in a tank top. Our school had no rule about tank tops except that the straps had to be at least 2 inches thick, so we didn't anticipate any problem, especially considering girls at our school wore tank tops all the time. After the first instance, the school announced that boys were no longer allowed to wear tank tops, and when questioned why, they claimed that the visible armpit hair was a distraction that inhibited learning. The following Tuesday, we all went to school wearing tank tops and sporting shaved armpits. In short, school claims guys can't wear tank tops because armpit hair is distracting. Next day, half the senior guys show up in tank tops with shaved armpits. At a former workplace, the dress code changed. Men were no longer allowed to wear shorts. Women could wear skirts. I started wearing a kilt because skirts were okay in the rulebook. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Not work-related, but school. In high school, I wore a t-shirt advertising a website that gave out free contraceptive. I was called down to the principal's office for 3 or 4 hours. My cool teachers thought it was awesome in the AM classes, and I was told I was promoting abhorrent behavior. I posited that I was in fact trying to prevent unwanted pregnancies. I lost my fight and was told I had to leave if I didn't have another shirt. Rather than leaving, I put a sticky note over the M in the problematic word and spent the rest of the day annoying faculty about fantastic lakeside condos that were being given away for free in freecondos.com. When Circuit City was still in business, I worked in the warehouse. For whatever reason, they had a strict dress policy of khaki pants, this awful collar shirt that also had to be tucked in as well. This went for everyone, even in warehouse. I discovered through an old warehouse employee guide, shoved in a drawer years ago and forgotten about, that as long as warehouse employees had khaki-colored shorts with no cargo pockets and a t-shirt with a Circuit City logo, there'd be no problem. Circuit City stopped making Circuit City t-shirts long before I started, but thanks to a local Salvation Army, I was able to pick up 2 Circuit City t-shirts and a quick trip to Target for some shorts, and now my new uniform was set. My managers were not happy about my appearance, claiming I looked sloppy and unkempt. Even better, there was the giant black dude from the warehouse who hated his job and just slept in the back and talked on his cell phone all day. When he found out about this new rule, he too had some old Circuit City t-shirts and joined in. Management hated us working together. I miss Circuit City. At my old school, they had rules about hair length, mostly for guys, and our teachers got pretty uptight about it. The only hard rules were that they couldn't pass our eyebrows or the collar area. Being the witty D-bag I was, I used a crap ton of gel to slick up my hair and do obnoxious things with it. It was all raised, so it never crossed my eyebrows or collar. I got away with it for 2 months until the principal changed the rules. All just because of me. Working at Big Five, there was a policy that men had to be clean-shaven or have a mustache. No beards or goatees or starburns. I cannot wear a mustache without looking like either a prevert or an 80s adult film star, but I hate shaving every day, so I grew out the biggest, creepiest Hulk Hogan stache ever witnessed and wore it proudly for the entire time I worked there. I work in food service. My job created a rule one day that one's hair cannot touch one's collar. I have rather long hair, but I always kept it in a braid and wore hats anyways. I was informed of this rule about 2 hours before the end of my shift and told that I had to comply immediately because I was breaking health code. I politely informed them that no, I was not. This was store policy, but I'd be happy to come in with my hair up the next day. I didn't think that was unreasonable. It takes a while. Not to mention pins and hair products and stuff to keep my hair up. That was not good enough apparently. Now. So I punched out for a break, brought rubber bands and floral wire, made 8 brands with the hair wire woven in, and stuck them in every direction. My boss saw me and began screaming. I calmly told him my hair wasn't touching my collar. In short, long hair not allowed to touch collar, created obnoxious hairdo within regulations. Haha, and that, children, is how we had Edward Scissorhands working in our restaurant for a day until management caved. Good times, good times. I used to work at the Jaws ride at Universal Studios, Florida. Our uniform consisted of a blue shirt, jeans or jean shorts, white socks, and white shoes. The unofficial dress code had a lot of us girls wearing jean shorts and white knee socks. One summer, I ended up working the Jaws ride and the Jungle Cruise at Walt Disney World simultaneously. I love Disney and had always wanted to work there, but I ended up finding it stifling with all sorts of silly and over-the-top rules. At the Jungle Cruise, you had to wear a khaki shirt, khaki shorts or pants, white socks, and brown shoes. One day, I didn't have any normal-sized socks to wear to the Jungle Cruise, so I ended up wearing my white knee-highs, which looked ridiculous with the jungle costume. When I got to work, one of my managers flipped out and told me my socks weren't in compliance with the Disney look, the official policies on how to dress at Disney. He made me roll my socks down. It looked like I was wearing little white life preservers around my ankles and looked more out of place than they looked originally. I was annoyed, so when I went home, I scoured my Disney look booklet for the policies pertaining to socks. All I could find was that socks had to be long enough to cover the ankle bone. There was no maximum height. Heck, I could have worn the white tights under my khaki shorts if I really wanted to. The next day, I wore my knee-highs again as a small act of rebellion. The same manager was there and he flipped out. He actually pulled me into the office to write me up, but before he could get me to sign the paperwork, I pulled out my copy of the Disney look and showed him that, while incredibly silly-looking, my socks were perfectly acceptable and that I'd continue to wear them like that. And so I did. I looked stupid, but I didn't care. Working for Disney wasn't a pleasant experience in my opinion, and it was very liberating to know that I could at least wear my socks however the heck I wanted to. My boss told me, "You have to cover Joe this upcoming weekend, both days, since everyone else said no." I said, "How do you know I'll say yes?" And he said, "You have to. There's nobody left." I said, "You're wrong. I'm left, but I quit. Now there's nobody left." He was speechless. His expression was priceless. I stood there about 10 seconds and said, "I'm walking away now," and I left. Thank God this happened the day after I'd secretly secured a better job. Probably one of my fondest memories. When I was in the army, I pulled my car up to an ATM on base to get cash. 4 guys piled out, leaving all doors open. While getting my cash, from somewhere behind me someone says, "You actually drive that frickin' piece of crap? I should call for a tow truck." Without bothering to turn around, I yelled back, "Frick you and your tow truck." I never did see who it was, as he was gone by the time I had my money. Next day, my squad leader calls me aside and asks me if I told my staff sergeant, P, to go F himself yesterday. And I had to admit that yes, I probably had. So I was in trouble. I had 3 other witnesses who were interviewed and signed sworn statements to the fact that I'd told a staff sergeant to go F himself and a tow truck. I was given the opportunity to read the incriminating statements before I made my own, just to point out that there was no point in lying. That's when I found out that only one guy had even known who it was because he was in civilian clothes, not on duty. So my statement detailed an aggressively profane and hostile person in civilian attire, identity unknown to me, whom I found to be acting irrationally and attempted to diffuse further confrontation by, quote, responding jovially in kind fashion. The beauty was that without reading the other statements, I'd have been unable to mesh my version of events so perfectly with the bland facts the others reported. The key point is, under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, there is no such thing as disrespecting a non-commissioned officer, only insubordination, which is very clear about being in uniform. At this point, everyone decided the best thing to do was sweep it under the rug, as Staff Sergeant P had far more to lose than I did, and magically everything went away. P continued to be a jerk to me at every opportunity, so I made a point of yelling, "Hey, P, frick you," whenever I saw him out of uniform. Eventually, my squad leader asked me to stop as a personal favor to him, so I did, but it was fun while it lasted. I went to a Catholic college and they didn't allow members of the opposite gender to spend the night in a dorm room. I made a huge case that they were discriminating against heterosexuals, and that rule miraculously disappeared the next year. I used to work at a lingerie store as an assistant manager, so I had to dress nice and look professional. All the other girls wore huge heels and always ended up complaining about how sore their feet were at the end of their shift, and I always wore flats to avoid having sore feet. They were still nice, stylish shoes, but they didn't have towering heels on them. My manager always used to get mad at me for not wearing heels and tried to claim it was part of dress code. I looked it up and showed her that it didn't say anywhere that I had to wear heels, just that I had to wear acceptable work attire, or something like that, and she tried to tell me it was an out-of-date dress code or something, so I'd tell her that she should get an updated one then. Eventually, she brought head office into the argument, and the provincial manager was trying to tell me to wear heels to work. I told them they'd have to pay me more than minimum wage to ruin my feet. I did not get a raise, and nobody ever told me to wear heels to work ever again. Look, I know some women who like to wear heels whenever they can, but you really can't force employees on a sales floor to rock something that uncomfortable all the time. It's just not cool. You could definitely get Department of Labor on your butt if you put that in your handbook, which is likely why they weren't able to. Okay, on the flip side, I'm the boss enforcing the policy. When I took over the department, the old boss told me that the reason the place looked like crap was because when he asked a sales associate, who was on base pay plus commission, to clean or put up stock, they claimed it wasn't in their job description. The main boss backed them up, calling it a technicality. I pulled out the description and read out, "Other duties as assigned by the manager," on the last line. 2 out of 9 of them quit. My department is now clean and stock is always up. Sales are consistently up. I'm cool with that. I work at Panera, and we were recently told that we had to get non-slip or slip-resistant shoes, else risk being fired. Rather than buying the ugly black kind all of my co-workers got, I got a bright purple pair of Doc Martens. All of the managers gave me the stink eye and asked, "Are those slip-resistant?" "You bet they are, motherfrickers." My buddy and I came into the office on the last day in the job. We found there was no clause against taking the boxes from the shipping department and turning them into armor. The box knights were born and died on that day. No door was safe from our attacks. I worked at a PetSmart 5 or so years ago, in the pet hotel where animals were boarded while their pet parents or owners went on vacation. Everything I did was in the back. No customers ever saw me, just the dogs and kitties. But my witch boss would always get on to me for forgetting my belt. So one day she was particularly mad at me for not having a belt, despite the fact that I was picking that shift up last minute for someone who was sick. I picked up a dog leash, put it through my belt hoops and said, "Well, it appears I now have a belt, don't I?" In the Navy, you must always have a white t-shirt under your uniform. I had a senior chief who constantly checked if your t-shirt wasn't visible and required that it be seen. I checked the uniform regulations and noticed that while in a working uniform, you can wear a V-neck tee. I started wearing them and he took notice as soon as he saw me. I told him that the regs allowed it. He scowled and his only comment was, "One for the blue shirts," and walked away. Then he hammered me for every reg violation he could find. You see, smart Alex never win, at least not in today's Navy. What weird and wonderful facts keep you awake at night? The United States hasn't minted any new Purple Heart medals since World War II. We've been using the stockpile that was prepared in anticipation of the ground invasion of Japan. We were anticipating so many casualties. We can't prove we aren't in a simulation. Schizophrenia's hallucinations are shaped by culture. Americans with schizophrenia tend to have more paranoid and harsher voices or hallucinations. In India and Africa, people with schizophrenia tend to have more playful and positive voices. There's a really new treatment called avatar therapy. It has a computer character mimic the particular person's malicious hallucinations, but gradually over time its voice and expressions become more friendly and controllable by the patient. Apparently, this treatment has the effect of giving the patient more control over the hallucinations and either getting rid of them completely or making the hallucinations more positive in nature. Since its discovery in 1930, Pluto has not yet made a full orbit of the Sun. It went from undiscovered to planet to not planet in less than 1 Pluto year. The Geyser Sphinx is so old that it was the ancient Egyptians themselves who performed the first restoration after digging it out from under the dunes over 1,000 years after it had been built. The sinking of the Titanic was a miracle to the lobsters in the galley. About 40% of the world's food is just wasted, and a lot of that is before it even hits the shelves. Cows kill more Americans than radical terror actors, most years. We should probably be turning the cows and the terror fighters against each other. There are now legally adult movie stars who were born after the year 2000. I remember IDing someone at my bar born in the year 2000 and being deeply unhappy when I realized that they were legally adults. All 6 of the stars of Friends negotiated 2% syndication rights for the show. Friends still makes about $1 billion yearly through reruns and Hulu and the other services. All 6 of the friends collect a $20 million check annually. Yes, that means David Schwimmer still gets $20 million a year for doing nothing. So, when you're alone in your one-bedroom apartment, watching Friends and snickering about how all of them are losers who haven't been famous since, there's a reason why. They don't have to work, ever again. Well, this comment was written before the sad passing of Matthew Perry, but in aging has provided us with yet another example of the proven fact that being rich doesn't necessarily make one content or happy, and often does the opposite. Over the space of 3 days, an estimated 165 people survived both the Hiroshima and Nagasaki nuclear bomb attacks. Tsutomu Yamaguchi is one of the more famous ones, who was only 2 miles from ground zero when the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. It hit when he was walking to work on the last day of a work trip. After he heard the drone of a plane, he looked up into the sky and then it lit up. He was plucked from the ground, spun around and tossed into a nearby potato field. Miraculously, he survived, despite being covered in burns, soaked in radiation, and with 2 blown eardrums. He spent a night in an air shelter and then took an overnight sleeper train home to Nagasaki to see his family. When he made it to a hospital in Nagasaki, he was so burnt a childhood friend didn't recognize him. Neither did his family. Despite his wounds, he made it to work the next day. He started giving his boss a rundown on what had happened, and his boss thought he was crazy. There was no way one bomb could destroy a city. Suddenly, a bright light lit up the room. He panicked and dropped to the floor of the office seconds before the shockwave smashed out the office windows. He had just been hit twice by nuclear blasts in the space of 3 days. At the age of 93, he was given the title Niyu Hibakusha, or twice-bombed person. He died the year afterwards. So, next time you think you're having a crappy week at work, yeah. Google's DeepMind self-learning AI, AlphaZero, spent 4 hours learning chess and proceeded to beat the top chess engine in the world. The particularly interesting part is that it wins by playing in a very human way. Chess engines tend to run algorithms to assess the board after a move is chosen, looking at millions of moves every second, and decide whose is better based on a set of parameters, making their play very direct. AlphaZero seems to develop a far more human playstyle, somehow seeing something less quantifiable than led to an advantage in position. Over the past 200 years, numerous chess masters studied a style of play similar to that of AlphaZero. That means that in 4 hours, AlphaZero developed a better understanding of the game than we could over the more than 1,000 years it's been studied. Lobsters just don't die of old age. Taking into consideration that humanity has only explored a small percentage of the ocean, there could very well be a big fricking lobster just chilling out there. And I should clarify that the square cube law prevents kaiju-sized ones, but there are still some pretty big ones out there that we don't really get to see. I saw one on the internet that was 4 foot long, had 2 foot long legs, and weighed 14 pounds. Still pretty cool. If you take into account the fact that on average people sleep or should sleep 8 hours a day, if and when you get to 99 years of age, you'll have only been awake for 66 years, having spent 33 years of your life sleeping. And that's why I always stay up late. As you get closer to a black hole, time goes slower. This means that everything farther away would experience time faster and faster as you get closer and closer to the black hole. A second for you could be 1 billion years for those outside of it. Thus, if you fell into a black hole and looked outside, you'd see the universe die with you. When Star Trek The Next Generation first aired, Data was roughly 60,000 times faster than the fastest computer on Earth. Today, the same character, Data, is roughly 500 times slower than the current fastest computer. There is on average a supernova explosion every 50 years in the Milky Way. On average, there are 30 every second in the observable universe. This is probably one of the best let that sink in facts in here. Let me just repeat that. Do you know how big the universe must be if it's 30 every second, while one of them takes 50 years in our galaxy? Fanta started as a Coca-Cola substitute in the early 1940s Germany under the reign of, well, that party. Fruit Loops are all the same flavor. Next to the US Army, Disney World is the largest buyer and importer of explosives in the USA. I was wondering what Mickey needed nukes for before I remembered that fireworks exist. Oh-ho! Mutually assured destruction! There are more tigers privately owned in Texas than free tigers in the wild. The moon orbits us from the west to the east, but we see it move across the sky east to west because of the rate of the Earth's rotation. Our observation is like being in a faster car watching a slower car, heading in the same absolute direction, fall further and further behind us. If the Earth was the size of a marble, you'd need 7 miles of space to build a scale model of the solar system. Due to the way the speed of light works, combined with our current understanding of the expansion of the universe, there are areas of the universe that are both impossible for us to visit or even observe. The fabric of the universe expands faster over that distance than light can travel, so it never reaches us. When you combine that with the bit where scientists currently think there's roughly 1 trillion visible galaxies, that's 4 times more stars than exist in the Milky Way, well, there was a time in history when trees existed, but the fungi which causes wood to rot had not yet evolved to digest wood. Dead trees and plants would pile up, and the 35% oxygen atmosphere caused massive fires. This is also the time where petrified wood came from. Trees would sit in the mud for thousands of years and not rot, while minerals slowly replaced the wood structures. The first electric car was invented at the end of the 1800s, and it went 65 miles per hour. Yep. Mainstream electric transport has a very long history and has actually been a legitimate option for development the entire time. Unfortunately, it's almost always sabotaged, misused, or taken advantage of by bad actors. Classic humans. The entire continent of South America is east of Florida. Go look at a map. Charlemagne's name translates to Charles the Great. This wasn't due to his leadership, this was due to the fact that he was 6'4" when the average male was 5'6". His nickname was just Big Charlie. There was a period of time where 4 distinct species of human lived concurrently. Neutron stars have such strong gravity that if you dropped a marshmallow into one, it would be like dropping a 3-megaton nuclear warhead on Earth. It took humanity approximately 4 times longer to switch from copper swords to steel swords than it took to switch from steel swords to nuclear bombs. Bing Crosby advocated for salmon conservation in the North Atlantic against Denmark's overfishing in the early 1970s. The Danish government banned everything Bing Crosby in Denmark, but because he was so popular there, the Danish people protested the government, making them overturn the Bing Crosby law and even to enact salmon conservation legislation. Bing Crosby single-handedly managed to create a piece of Danish law. Scientists who work with cockroaches often develop allergies towards cockroaches. At the same time, they also develop allergies to pre-ground coffee. I work for a large coffee roaster. When you cut open the bags of green coffee from all of those third-world countries, it's amazing the things you find. Coffee is essentially dried in the middle of streets, and any number of things can end up in there. We found shoes, farming tools, huge needles for weaving the bags, 100% chance of bugs in coffee from some places, and the good news is those little guys are roasted to 400 degrees and disintegrated by the time the roast is over. The Titanic had 2 sister ships, the Britannic and the Olympic. There was a woman called Violet Jessup, a nurse and cruise liner stewardess that worked on all 3 ships. The Olympic crashed into a warship while leaving the harbor, but was able to make it back. So she was on Titanic as it sank, and is referenced in the Titanic film, a stewardess that was told to set an example to the non-English-speaking passengers as the ship sank. She looked after a baby on Lifeboat 16 until being rescued by the Carpathia the next day. It's not known what exactly caused the sinking of the Britannic, but the lifeboats hit the water too early. As the ship sank, the rear listed up and a number of lifeboats were sucked into the propellers. Violet had to jump out of the lifeboat she was in and sustained a serious head injury, but survived. She was on board for all 3 incidents in the space of 5 years. But she went back to continue to work at sea for another 30 years before retiring in 1950. She died of heart failure in 71. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. China at one point used more concrete in 3 years than the US used in the entire 20th century. There's about 12 times more trees on Earth than stars in the Milky Way. There was only 65 years between the Wright brothers' first flight and the moon landing. The Holy Roman Empire existed until 30 years after the United States was founded. There are more chickens in America than people on the planet. Gwen Stefani is older than Ted Cruz. Didn't believe it. Googled, and it's true. That crap is bananas. When NASA pitched the idea of the Voyager mission to Richard Nixon with the idea of touring the outer planets, he was told that the last time it was possible, Thomas Jefferson was in the White House. The particular planetary alignment that Voyager 2 used on its journey occurs only once every 176 years. Your bones are wet. If the Sun were scaled down to the size of a white blood cell, the Milky Way galaxy would be the size of the continental United States. The vastness of space is mind-boggling. We are closer to the 2050s than the 1990s. If you live in the USA, you have better odds of dating Taylor Swift than dying of bird flu and Ebola combined. Oh, now you're just trying to scare us. In the span of the Star Wars sequel trilogy, the Cleveland Browns won one game. The man who invented the Frisbee was cremated and turned into a Frisbee. Anne Frank and Martin Luther King were born in the same year, and Queen Elizabeth and Marilyn Monroe were born 1 month apart. Stegosaurus lived 150 million years ago. T-Rex lived 65 million years ago. Stegosaurus was more ancient to the T-Rex than the T-Rex is to us. The Great Pyramid was built before the last woolly mammoth died. So it appears that after the first batches of answers here, a lot of the facts that seem to blow our commenters' minds are just the sheer scale of time in the universe. Admittedly, it is fascinating to get the perspective, but I'll try and spread them amongst the other rarer answers that we're getting here. Vending machines have killed more people than sharks. Well, duh. Why would vending machines go around killing sharks? Pineapples take 2 years to grow. You could place all of the planets of our solar system between Earth and the Moon and even have a bit of spare space afterwards. But 10 out of 10 scientists all agree that this is a bad idea and should not be attempted. The US federal government classifies the white powdery stuff as a less serious, more useful substance than Mary J., also known as green herb. When humans first started farming, blue eyes in humans hadn't evolved yet. The cigarette lighter was actually invented before the match. Dozens of Americans die every day from slipping in the shower and hitting their heads. Dozens, I tell you. It's one of the primary leading causes of non-medical deaths in the USA. After hitting the iceberg, it took 2 hours and 40 minutes for the Titanic to fully submerge underwater. Let that sink in. The more I think about it, the more I realize that it took people quite a while to realize how significant it was, and that getting off a huge ocean liner would take so much time. The US Navy has the second largest air force in the world, and the US Army has the third. The UK Dyslexia Association is situated in Reading, which is spelt like the word reading just to mess with everyone. Gary Newman is older than Gary Oldman by a little under 2 weeks. What's new is old and what's old is new. Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Donald Trump were all born within a 66-day stretch. Macaulay Culkin is now older than Catherine O'Hara was when she played his mum in Home Alone, and Mark Hamill in The Force Awakens is older than Alec Guinness was in A New Hope. If you have clean water and temperature control, you're better off than half the population. Sharks are older than trees, or at least they predate them. The oldest shark fossils we know of are 420 to 450 million years old. The oldest known tree is Watiza, which is about 385 million years old. AITA, the longest living animal ever, was a giant tortoise given to Clive of India. He was born around 1750 and died in 2006. When he died, he had existed for longer than the United States had at the time. Your computer is much more likely to contract a virus by surfing legitimate church websites than by surfing adult websites. The latter sites generally have experts combating viral stuff, while church sites are maintained by lower-tech volunteers as a rule. The overall goal in golf is to play less golf, incidentally analogous to my approach at my job. Oxford University is actually older than the Aztecs. Let me explain. The University of Oxford, informally Oxford University or simply Oxford, is a collegiate research university located in Oxford, England. It has no known date of foundation, but there's evidence teaching goes as far back as 1096. making it the oldest university in the English-speaking world and the world's second oldest university in continuous operation. It grew rapidly from 1167 when Henry II banned English students from attending the University of Paris. After disputes between students and Oxford townfolk in 1209, some academics fled northeast to Cambridge, where they established what became the University of Cambridge. The two ancient universities are frequently jointly referred to as Oxbridge. The Aztec Empire, or the Triple Alliance, began as an alliance of three Nuhua, Altepetl city-states: Mexico, Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan. These three city-states ruled the area in and around the Valley of Mexico from 1428 until the combined forces of the Spanish conquistadors and their native allies under Hernan Cortés defeated them in 1512. France was still using the guillotine when the first Star Wars film came out. To be in the top 1% of Americans in terms of income, you need to rake in about $400,000 a year, rounded off to about $1,000 a day. The US dropped 26,172 bombs in 2016. That's almost 72 per day. That's about 3 bombs an hour, every hour, for the entire year. In 2017, the US had already dropped more bombs than that by September. Your body consists of a roughly 1-to-1 ratio of bacterial to human cells. Tasty, tasty. You hear that, folks? We're about 50% germs. Remember to eat enough food to share with everybody in your body. If you make the choice not to have children, you're the first person in your direct ancestry, all the way back to the first humans related to you, to do so. Actually, you'd be the first organism in your line not to reproduce all the way back to the very first organism 4 billion or so years ago. A real trailblazer. Great fact. The Teotihuacan pyramids, known to be the most architecturally significant Mesoamerican pyramids, were not built by the Aztecs. The Aztecs found them abandoned, settled there, and gave them their names. The origin of their founders are still a mystery. I studied Mesoamerican cultures in college for some reason, and it's not that great of a mystery. There's not a consensus on what the people called themselves because they'd vacated by the time the Nahuatl or the Aztecs arrived. However, it's pretty safe to say its founders were from around the mountains of northern central Mexico, and archaeologists actually know quite a bit about their culture. It's amazing and also terrifying knowing that a civilization capable of building something like that could just vanish without a trace. It's the same thing with the canal system in Arizona. It was built by a native tribe and abandoned, and no one knows why. Being able to move all of that water around the desert was and is an incredible infrastructure achievement, and then they just left. The majority of the first American settlers only survived their first winter by eating their dead children. I mean, it makes sense. Have you tried eating them while they're still alive? Astronomer here. I always like that the coldest place we know of in the universe is on Earth. Even a dense dust cloud in space, aka the coldest spots we know of, are a few degrees above absolute zero, the coldest temperature there is. In laboratories on Earth, however, it's quite common to get a few fractions of a degree above absolute zero for experiments. Ergo, you don't remember being born or most of the first year of your existence. All you know is one day you just started existing and taking in experiences and memories. Scientists haven't found out one particular brain component responsible for consciousness. There is no physical proof of consciousness, it just is. All that stuff you learn about in history class about civilizations rising up and dying out, and about certain groups killing off others and taking over their lands, that stuff is still happening right now. Snipers are supposed to camp. The overwhelming majority of hands you've touched in your life have had a man's eggplant in them at one point. About 1 million people die every year from mosquito bites. That's 2,700 per day or 100 every hour. Think about how many must have died since you first started watching this video. Cleopatra was born closer to the moon landing than when the pyramids were built. A single iPhone today is more powerful than every computer NASA had combined in 1969 during the first lunar landing. They got people to the moon using slide rules. Red, green, and yellow peppers are just the same plant at different levels of ripeness. How is this not upsetting to everyone else? Every subsequent year of your life makes up a smaller proportion of it relative to your previous years of living. So at 1 year old, a year is 100% of your life. At 2, it's 50%, and so on. Maybe that's why time feels like it passes more quickly the older we get. There are more Mary J. dispensaries in Colorado than McDonald's, 7-Eleven, and Starbucks combined. The city of Atlanta in Texas is closer to Atlanta, Georgia, 3.5 states away, than it is to El Paso, Texas. That's just how big Texas is. Also, Bristol, Tennessee is closer to Canada than it is to Memphis, Tennessee. If you have 2 legs, you strictly speaking have more than the average amount of legs across the entire human population, and literally only one person would need to lose a leg to have this happen. Averages are weird. The average hours of minimum wage work needed to pay for 4 years of public college was 306 hours for baby boomers and is 4,459 for millennials. The universe is so empty that if we took 3 grains of sand and placed them inside a vast cathedral, that cathedral would be more filled with sand than the universe is with stars. When did you get busted at a shameful or disgusting moment? When I was like 12 maybe, we got a new family computer with a scanner. I stayed up late playing with it in the den. After scanning everything I could find, I scanned my hands, face, feet, and I even scanned my butt. It was so slow though, the scans would be all messed up and jittery from me moving. So, I flipped a small trash can, put the scanner on top, and knelt down in front of it. I worked up something decently rigid down there and then closed the door on the scanner. Mid-scan, the door to the den slowly opens. It's my sleepy dad in his undies looking very confused at me doggy-styling the new family scanner. "What are you doing?" "I'm scanning my eggplant." He didn't react at all, he just backed out and closed the door. It was 5 seconds of my life maybe, but it haunts me. I think about how I just plainly stated my activity in a sort of defiant, "well, what the hell do you think I'm doing?" kind of way, but also chose the medically correct term for my manhood, which didn't match the tone. Obviously, I had to say eggplant for YouTube. Like, as a kid I could have said wee-wee or junk or whatever, but I said the P word. When I was 17 or something, I was watching an adult flick in the middle of the night. After I finished whacking it, I felt a slight pain in my ball bag, like someone had flicked their finger on it. That pain increased to the point where I had to walk it out. After some minutes, I began screaming from the pain when my parents came to my room. Don't worry, I wasn't undressed. They saw me in pain on the floor. At that moment, I thought I did something wrong while cranking the bald man, but was too ashamed to tell them. My dad rushed me to the emergency room where I was rushed in and my pants were taken off. Lying there with everything out, they gave me a nose spray which halted some of the pain. The doctor then started handling my equipment sack while the nurse stood next to me reminding me to breathe because the nose spray stopped the automatic breathing, if that makes sense. All the time, my dad was standing there looking, and the only thing I could think of at that moment was, oh no, did they think my eggplant is small? After that, the doctors brought me to another room while my dad was elsewhere. While going through the halls, I told the doctor I probably knew the cause and explained that I was exercising my vital organ. I don't remember the doctor's response, but I felt truly ashamed, like I was the only person doing such a thing. Later, the doctor told me I had testicular torsion, which is caused by the jewels not being attached to the sac. So I'm living in fear of it happening again to this day. Yet another random thing for me to be scared of randomly hitting me at any given moment of my life. I can imagine it would be a pretty scary deterrent towards engaging in that frequent teenage boy activity at any given time. Speaking of, at least a couple of these stories involve adult films, which I will be pronouncing as the word prawn instead of the word spelt P-O-R-N. When I was around 10 or 11 years old, my dad got my brother and I a computer to use. He set it up in the den and pretty much allowed us free, unsupervised access to it. He had gone out with his friends one night, and my brother, one of his friends, and myself were on the internet just typing in random things and adding .com to it. Now, back in the early 2000s, it didn't take long for us to stumble upon prawn, which led to us clicking on more and more prawn links because we were all like, holy crap, there's undressed women on here. Eventually, we bricked the computer and it blue-screened on us. Instead of turning it off and unplugging the computer and turning off the monitor, we just left it and went to bed. My dad got home and saw the blue screen, did the old Control-Alt-Delete trick to pull up Task Manager, saw that we had multiple prawns pulled up on the web browser. At this point, he makes us all come out of the den, sits us on the couch and tries to make us confess as to why the computer was blue-screened. We of course shrugged and acted like we had no clue. He then turned the monitor on and went through the internet history. We all just had to sit there while my dad clicked through some of the most heinous, debased stuff I've ever seen in my life. The whole time, he was just reading out the history and then he'd say something like, Jesus frickin' Christ, what the hell is wrong with you all? Yeah, that computer did not last very long. In the late 90s or early 2000s, we bought a pub and moved into it. It had a big screen downstairs and we lived above, but Sky Sports was so expensive for the business account, we basically hooked the giant screen to our box upstairs, so whenever the sport was on, it would show on the screen downstairs, so we couldn't watch TV upstairs except what was being shown on the big screen when this was happening. Anyway, one Sunday evening around 10 p.m. after the sport, bearing in mind the sport had finished at 6 p.m., I was freely browsing through the channels because the giant screen had been wound up into the ceiling, and my 14-year-old self came across some soft shell prawn. Curious, I started watching it. Suddenly, there was a big buzz from the phone that connected to downstairs. I answer it. It's my mum with laughing in the background. "What are you watching?" I was like, I was just flicking through channels. "Well, you've stayed on that one for a while, haven't you?" I forgot about the small TV in the bar area. It was still on and was showing the entire pub what my curious 14-year-old self was watching. I was mortified. Luckily, my mum never brought it up again, and neither did any of the customers, thankfully. When I was about 10, my parents were out, so I looked up some prawns on the family computer, which was mistake number 1. Then I kept hearing noises and thought somebody was in the house. So I ran to my room and called my dad, leaving the computer on, which was mistake number 2. My dad rushed home and ran around the house looking for an intruder. Nobody was there. It was just my next-door neighbor. We have a semi-detached house. Then obviously he saw what I was looking at on the computer and asked me about it. I told him the intruder must have broken in and searched for that stuff. When I was a curious teen, my brother walked into me trying to suck my own eggplant. Upside down, butt in the air, hunched over. When I was 12, my younger sister walked in on me playing Fondle the Dongle. I told her I couldn't pee and was trying to force and pump it out. She told my mum out of worry, said I needed a doctor to help me pee. When my mum confronted me about what my sister was saying, I then had to explain to her. When I was with my ex, we did some long distance for a while. While I'm not about sending exposed photos of myself willy-nilly, after not seeing each other for so long, you kinda get an urge to see the other person in that state. So, photos were exchanged. She was mostly interested in close-ups of my rock-hard tower, so I sent those. Upon returning home, I discovered that she had a picture of my proud pillar as my profile picture in her phone, meaning that if I'd call her, my manhood would be presented on the screen in all of its glory. I told her this was not a great idea. What if I'd call her and my phone was laying around somewhere? She said she's never had her phone laying around, so nobody would see. I didn't think any more about it. A few weeks later, we were having dinner with her parents, and she was talking about getting a new phone. Her father, with a straight face and in between 2 bites of his food, remarked, "Gee, if you get this new phone, does that mean you'll install a different picture for when he calls you?" And I died 1,000 deaths. In grade 9, we didn't really have internet at home, which wasn't unusual at the time. I saw this lady on Mary Povich that had a really large chest, and she advertised her webpage. This was something I just had to see. The internet was still enough of a novelty that any website was worth checking out, but Prawn was, up until now, only available by stealing dirty magazines. So the next day, in design class, I took the computer at the far end of the room, which was flanked by the darkened windows of an adjacent classroom. So you can guess where this is going. I turn the screen away from my classmates and teacher and start looking at the glorious, bountiful melons of this Mary Povich guest. Moments later, I notice movement in my peripheral vision, and when I turn my head, I see that the classroom I thought was empty was in fact full. It was full of laughing and pointing seniors. Their teacher rushes into the room screaming, "You can't do that!" grabs me by the wrist and physically pulls me to the principal's office. That principal was the best. He just looked at me and asked, "No internet at home?" And when I said, "No," he said, "Well, I think you've been through enough. Don't do it again," with a chuckle, and let me go without further punishment. Needless to say, I was pretty much famous in my high school in the worst way possible. People would literally point and laugh at me in the halls. "Hey, it's the prawn guy." Frick my life. You know what? He was correct. I feel like you would have had to move state when you finished your school after that incident. And holy crap, I have ended up using the prawn replacement a lot more than I thought I would in this video. In middle school, my friend got her chest and she wanted me to touch them. We probably spent 30 minutes every day before school feeling each other up in the back of the library until the librarian caught us and we were suspended. I wish I could say I enjoyed it, but going to first period with a rager wasn't ideal every day. My high school girlfriend and I were doing the deed in the sideways, lying down cuddling position. Mum walked in to show me a new Christmas decoration. To her, it looked like we were just cuddling, but she sat on the bed inches away from me, actively inside my girlfriend, and proceeded to talk about the decoration for like 10 minutes. I wonder if she knew. They never cared much about that stuff, so I think she was just oblivious. I tried to make a female adult toy out of hot glue. I was 18, came home very drunk from a night out, and hopped into bed with my then girlfriend. Fortunately for me, she woke up and was keen to fool around. Me being in the state I was in, I didn't have time for lubricant or aiming and went in hard and fast. The first and only push led to what I can only imagine as the equivalent of snapping your Achilles tendon, except this tendon wasn't located in my leg. It was in fact my frenulum, which you should Google. Or not. Instantly, I panicked. I turned the light on and told my ex to hang on. I looked down to see that I had basically snapped my banjo string in half and essentially given myself a DIY snippy snip. There was lots of blood. I played it cool. My gut instinct was to run to the bathroom. Once I was in there, I wrapped my ding-dong up in toilet paper like Tutankhamun, emptied out the toothbrush cup holder, filled it with warm water, and stuck it in the cup to try to cool it down. Well, that hurt. By this time, I'd lost a fair amount of blood, and me being me, a hypochondriac and bad with blood, I tried to sit down on the side of the bath to not pass out. That didn't work. Long story short, I woke up to my ex-girlfriend's dad standing over me at 7 in the morning, about 3 hours later, after he had followed a trail of blood down the hallway to where he'd normally take his morning shower. There I was, lying in the bathtub, passed out, Johnson wrapped up in toilet paper, shoved inside his toothbrush cup holder in my birthday suit, covered in blood. My partner at the time fell back asleep after I'd left the bedroom that night and left her poor father to find me blackout drunk in his bathtub after trying to do the deed with his daughter. He thought I was dead. I wished I was. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Thought nobody was home, got a train run on me by my partner, and I was really loud. Turns out my mum was home, and she heard us doing the deed. When I was 5 or 6 years old, my mum was having a dinner party with some new friends. I'd been put to bed for the night, and I randomly got a rager. I learned that I could move it up and down if I flexed it. I thought this was so cool that I needed to share it with somebody. So I ran out to the dining room, completely undressed, and proceeded to show an entire dinner party my new trick with my favorite toy. Everyone was mortified, and I was confused why nobody else thought it was cool. My dad caught me editing the game files of The Sims to replace the female underwear textures with underwear that just made them look undressed. I looked up some reference material and edited them in Photoshop. That's a lot of effort to put into something so depraved, isn't it? I didn't even know about mods back then. I guess it's weird that I put more research into how to do this than just how to download a mod. At least this way I learned the hard way how low the female reproductive organ is. It looks pretty weird if you plop it in the same place that a Johnson would go. I was once extremely drunk and staying in a very expensive hotel in Hollywood. I went to bed as I should. I woke up in the middle of the night and had to go tinkle. I walked through the bathroom door and closed it behind me. I then realized that wasn't the bathroom door, but rather the room door. I was locked out of my room in a fancy hotel, drunk out of my mind, wearing only my undies. I went to the elevator lobby where there was a phone, and I called the front desk and explained my situation. They said they'd send someone up. I realized I couldn't wait and continued searching for a place to pee, and found a janitor closet with a rolling mop bucket in it. I took a giant whiz in the mop bucket and then walked back to my room door, where a bellhop who really didn't want to look me in the eye let me back into my room. I'm very sorry, Mondrian Hotel. I'd started taking antidepressants when I was around 20, and I didn't take the delayed climax warning as a side effect seriously. It was like blowing up a balloon to infinity and then it never pops, or shaking a soda can that doesn't explode after being opened. Very unsatisfying. That being said, after servicing myself started taking more than 10 minutes, I stopped taking those antidepressants. Around this time, though, I was also starting to date someone with a high libido, and she was okay with me not being able to finish, but was into a lot of stuff. One of those things was wanting me to stroke myself on her. Let me tell you, the awkwardness that goes from stroking yourself in front of a smiling girl for half an hour. That smile turns into a bored look as we both sink into what we're doing. Then I discovered, surprisingly, that I was into that. When she gave a defeated, "Are you close?" statement, the floodgates opened, and after being delayed for near an hour, there was a lot. Even worse, I definitely made a guttural sound of mostly air as my knees almost gave out when it happened. Yeah, so I'm on different antidepressants now. Well, that's certainly a predilection that I've never heard of before. I imagine getting off on people's disappointment could be a real plus for some guys. Literally a "joke's on you, I'm into that crap" moment. I was violently ill in my fiancé's house where we were living, while he was at work and his dad was working from home. I needed my mum to take me to the hospital. I screamed for my father-in-law's help, who entered the bathroom to my undressed body, crapping and throwing up at the same time in his bathtub. He called my mum for me, and we never spoke about it again. I thought God would kill me for cranking it when I was little, so I barely ever did it. But the house would know when I was doing it because I'd yell, "I'm sorry, God!" My family wasn't even religious. I didn't even know where I got that idea from. Somehow the idea of your parents being non-religious makes this so much funnier. Like, instead of being disappointed, they're just thoroughly confused by their weird kid. When my friends had to change my hygienic pad at a party in high school where I was drunk out of my mind, they gave me a shower to wake me up and took off the used pad and put a new one on and helped me get dressed. Not my proudest moment. In the same vein, I brushed a friend's teeth after a party because he was super out of it but hated the taste in his mouth. We put him on a mattress to sleep, and I got a new toothbrush with a little bit of toothpaste, and gently brushed his teeth as he was laying there, smashed. I then put a water bottle and bucket next to him, and he fell asleep like a baby. Also, important advice, if you're helping a drunk person go to bed, make sure you put them in the lateral sleep position. They lay on their side, and you can use pillows to put up against their back, and belly to make sure they stay put. If they lay on their back and chuck up during their sleep, they could choke or drown. There was this cheap bachelor party adult toy that melted in my bedside drawer after my AC in my room broke for a week, but I didn't know that until I got my hand stuck in it in front of a guy who was asking me out. I opened the drawer and reached in looking for my chapstick while we were talking, and to my absolute horror, I couldn't pull my hand back out. It was completely stuck to something. Turns out that a fake silicone vibrating toy I got as a gag gift melted around the 3 other real silicone ones and then started to cure again. It was like a half-dry superglue, but shaped like a 4-headed male organ. It looked weaponized, and crucially, it was stuck to my fricking hand. The guy tried to help me, but he just ended up getting his hands on it too. We had to take turns spraying each other with scalding hot water to get it off. I've never been so mortified in my life. Needless to say, we never saw each other again. I grew up in a rural area with dial-up internet. I was only able to load undressed images from the top down. I finished before it loaded past the neck. I guess my thing is a pretty face and a beautiful, happy smile. Did the deed in a car park and a passing driver tried to high-five me. Still haunts me, to be honest. I was a teenager who was out of control. I dug a zucchini-sized hole in the ground, filled it with axle grease, and banged it. And 9 months later, Lightning McQueen was born. I just started discovering myself fairly early and was starting to watch prawns. I was already craving to know what one of those male appendages felt like inside of me, but the closest thing I had to the shape of one was a hairbrush with a circular handle. So with this, I went to town until I got tired. About 2 weeks later, I was due for my period, but it was late and I immediately started freaking out thinking I was pregnant. I decided to tell my mother, bawling my eyes out, apologizing for being pregnant, which confused my mum quite a bit, I can tell you. It was about 30 minutes later that my mum had to re-explain how doing the deed worked and how hairbrushes don't get you pregnant. Doing the deed with my wife, then girlfriend, in the back of my car when a bright light shines in the window. The cop asks, "What's going on here?" And I calmly respond, "We're just doing the deed, sir." He was nice, told us it was technically public exposure, and it would be best if we just hightailed it out of the parking lot. My high school boyfriend and I were doing the deed in his attic bedroom, both of us completely undressed. I was bouncing and moaning and making a lot of noise with the headboard because we were home alone. Well, his mum came home early and we had no idea until she was at the top of the stairs calling his name and walked in on me completely undressed and riding her son. She took a breath, calmly told us to get dressed and come downstairs. When we did, she told us she was very disappointed and asked him to walk me home. He very quietly told her we'd planned to go to church youth group afterwards. She let us leave after she picked her jaw up off the floor. That was the first time I met his mother. Well, to be fair, most teens who go to youth group talk the talk but don't walk the walk and get up to as much nocturnal activity as they would have anyway regardless, so I can only think it was funny that you got caught this way. When I was a teenager, I was obsessed with Nirvana. I had all of their albums, a bunch of shirts, and a bunch of books, including a couple of conspiracy theory books about him being murdered. Anyway, I got grounded and had all technology taken away from me. One day I was super in the mood and having trouble whacking it without prawns. I was mid-whack when I remembered that there was, for some frickin' reason, a photo in one of the conspiracy books of Courtney Love's exposed chest. For 2 weeks straight, sometimes multiple times a day, I whacked the mule to Courtney Love's tots in black and white. Shameful. I have vitiligo, meaning patches of my skin have no melanin at all. It's not very noticeable as I'm fairly light-skinned, and except for a couple of patches on my hands, it's mostly on my member. When I was maybe 15, a girl I had a crush on noticed the patches on my hands and asked me about it. I explained what it was and she asked if I had it elsewhere. I answered, as I said, it's mostly on my eggplant. She kind of chuckled and said, "So it looks like a cow?" I said, "Yes, it does in fact look like a cow." She said, "I'd love to see it." I said, "Yeah, it's weird," turned around and walked away, completely and entirely oblivious. I used to read some weird smut when I was younger, as I hated all prawns in video form. I distinctly remember reading one that had women in stalls like cows. They kept using the term "who cow," which at the time I didn't realize was obviously a mashup of the word human and cow. I didn't think much of it, but one time I was talking to a friend and trying to remember the term for a female cow. My brain thought "who cow" and I almost said it before catching myself. I know they probably wouldn't have caught on, but it killed me inside that I almost said something from some pretty weird smut from the internet. I once tried to smack a girl's butt when she was riding me and I whacked myself square in the sack. It made an audible thwack and we had to stop for a bit while I doubled over in pain. We had a good laugh about it, but I really thought my aim was better than that. Ladies, when did you regret saying no to a guy who asked you out? My grandma just told me one of these. In high school, she met this guy. He was very intelligent, fairly good-looking, and greatly humorous. She really liked him, and she was very aware that he liked her as well. So one day, he finally asks her out, and she rejects him. My grandma continues to say about how he turned out so well with money and a really nice life. So naturally, I asked, "Well, why did you reject him?" And her exact words were, "Well, I couldn't date a ginger." Old people. The best part is she ended up having a red-headed son anyway. One time I said no because I was too busy with my exams. I had my head buried in my books when he asked me. The timing was just all wrong. I regret saying no. Dude, the ball's in your court at that point. What's wrong with asking him out once you're not in finals anymore? If a girl tells me she's busy but maybe sometime in the future, while giving no specific timeline, I assume that's code for "I'm not interested." If it's not code, you have to be the one to broach the subject again. I'm not going to keep pestering you. I've learned my lesson. Had a guy ask me out in high school. Really fun guy. Very nice, funny, athletic, smart, and good-looking. I turned him down because I knew he'd already done the deed with someone, and I wasn't ready to do it at the time. It wasn't about his morals. I did desperately want to date him, but I just felt like I'd never be able to make him happy, and I was embarrassed that I hadn't had that experience yet. A few years later in college, I ran into him when I was home on break. He's still the perfect guy, hasn't changed a bit. I really screwed the pooch on that one. Had a very close friend in high school who really liked me for years. I was his prom date and all, but when he started to want to be more than friends, I was really hesitant. So I said no and distanced myself, even though I should have said yes, I know. Long story short, I'm a Sikh, and I was rebelling against my parents' wishes to be with a practicing Sikh. Such a stupid reason. We stayed friends though. In college, I started to like him even more, but we both had significant others. I kept thinking of telling him how I felt, but I kept these feelings in my head all throughout college without saying anything, and instead I stayed with my D-bag of a boyfriend. Then when I was getting close to admitting everything to him, he passed away while on vacation with his family. In 4th grade, a boy passed me a note asking me whether I'd be his girlfriend, and to circle yes or no. I was caught off guard, but my friend sitting next to me wasn't. I believe she said, "Ew, rip it up," and I did. He was a nice kid. I should have circled yes, and I really shouldn't have ripped it up. That was very rude of me. Sorry, Jeremy. Poor Jeremy. Oh well, hopefully he eventually found someone less dependent on their friends' whims at the time. Although, as that other person wrote earlier, there is nothing wrong with coming to your senses later and asking someone who you know likes you. Well, 2 guys come to mind. Guy 1 was so sweet and I did like him, but he was going too fast for my liking, saying "I love you" too soon and stuff. He somehow lost heart in pursuing a relationship with me when I told him to slow down as it was making me uncomfortable. We rekindled our thing a few years later, but it wasn't quite the same and it didn't amount to anything serious. He's now in a long-distance relationship with a beautiful girl. From what I can see from the outside of their relationship, he's very sweet and a devoted boyfriend. I sometimes think I missed out. Guy 2 was someone I really liked, but he was always talking to or about other girls, so I didn't think he liked me that much. One day, he asked if I'd go out with him, but it was set up to seem like a joke, so I said, no, that's ridiculous, because I didn't want to appear too eager and vulnerable. I found out later he was serious but wanted to seem casual. He had moved on to other girls by the time I found out, and went into a relationship with this other person. She was his first girlfriend. When they broke up, it devastated him. Then, sometime after, we got together. I was his rebound, so it was doomed from the start as he wasn't over her. I thought if I'd said yes to him when he asked me the first time, I would have been his first and he would have loved me much more. This happened in high school, hence all of these stupid games and predictions. Oh, don't worry, those stupid games can go well into adulthood. I did this event at the Queen Mary and I could not stop staring at this guy. I just thought he was the most gorgeous thing on the planet. My event coordinator noticed and ended up bringing him over the last night when they had a ball. We walked around the deck, and when I told him about how earlier I'd slipped and almost fell, he swooped me into a dip and said, like this. He tried to teach me how to dance, which he was great at, told me about how he'd traveled and loved school and all the same things as me. It was the best and most romantic night of my life. I had to go back to my group, and he stopped me on the stairs to kiss me and said, "This is the last chance I'm going to get to do this. What do you want me to do?" I told him I needed him to keep walking because at the time I was in an on and off again relationship with a total scumbag. I think about him all the time and beat myself up a lot for passing on someone so great for someone who didn't care about me at all. If I could redo one thing in my life, it would be that night. Damn it. I know I'm a complete idiot. He was unreal in how wonderful he was. Yes, I fully admit to being that girl who picked up the D-bag, but it was my first relationship and lesson was definitely learned. After stewing on this and beating myself up a bit, I think I'm going to try and find him. He has a pretty uncommon name, luckily. Last I heard he had a girlfriend, but we'll see. Crappy mental health, didn't feel like I could have a healthy relationship because of it. Back in my teens, my self-esteem was so low that it was easier to believe otherwise really nice guys were trying to make fun of me rather than they were actually interested. Some of them were nice guys I had crushes on for years. Yay me. I don't really regret this one, but I wish I'd been someone else that could have given him a chance. He was all shy and cute and seemed like a genuinely good person. It was in the train. But I was and am in love with somebody else. Well, there was this one guy who served at the register I was working, who seemed nice and normal. He came back later and handed me his number, and I sort of wondered what would have happened if I'd called it. I lost the number, but I remember his name, and I know he probably lives in the area. Yeah, I know how working the register is. A girl once wrote "call me" on her receipt after she signed it and handed it back to me, but she forgot to put her number on it, so I just threw it away. Wasted opportunity. Haha, she was so nervous she forgot your number? Aww. It was freshman year of college. I made eye contact with some random guy from across the quad. He walked over, sat next to me, and we had a short conversation. He invited me to his room before my friends showed up and dragged me away. Turns out we lived in the same building. I went to his room and we talked and joked as though we'd known each other our entire lives. And constantly, this kick-butt engineer student was complimenting me, the mediocre biology kid, on how smart I was. He and I ran into each other several times, and there was always a palpable tension between us. But I was in a long-distance relationship at the time, and I never went for it. I turned down the only guy to ever give me butterflies in my stomach and make me smile like an idiot. This is tangential because he never asked directly, like he hinted at it enough that I really should have gotten the picture, but I wasn't thinking about starting anything because I was moving 4 states away in less than a week. It's 3 months later and I still think about what could have been sometimes. My main motivation for acquiring fame and wealth and muscles is to put a lot of girls into the situation you're describing. That's healthy, right? My mum was waiting for this guy to get off stage so she could interview him for Buddy magazine, when this weird little guy comes over and asks her out. Her actual words were, "He was way too ugly, I was just too good for him," after I asked her why she shut him down. So anyway, this guy turned out to be Stevie Ray Vaughan. She said that when the guy she was waiting for finally got off stage, the little guy got up and did a couple of songs. She instantly regretted treating him like that and tried to talk to him afterwards, and he told her, "I wasn't good enough for you before I played, and nothing's changed." Cue me and everyone else watching jumping on our keyboards so we can Google Stevie Ray Vaughan and rate him based on attractiveness. I mean, I'd give him a solid 6 out of 10, but I wager that changes when you see him play on stage and in his element. I worked for several years with a gentleman who we'll call Harry. We had a lot of fun at work and also went out surfing, beach days, mutual friends stuff together too. Only gradually did I realize I was developing genuine feelings for him. I kept all of this to myself, of course. He seemed way out of my league and I didn't want to make our work relationship awkward. Once he asked me if I'd go shopping with him to find some shoes. We went to the mall, found some kicks, and then he asked me if I wanted lunch. I said, no, I wanted to work out before work, so see you later. Didn't understand he was maybe asking me to lunch as a date until much later. Idiot. We continued to work together and hang out as friends though, and we both dated other people. Eventually, he left the job to travel and finish school, but still came by to hang out. One night we were all drinking and we went out back to share a smoke. We were pretty drunk, and I was sitting on this raised box thing, and he stood in front of me, placed his hands on my knees, looked into my eyes and said, Julia, I love you. I've never been able to say this before. I love you. I've loved you a long time. And I said, okay, handed him the smoke and went back inside. I didn't know how to reply. I had inklings that he had feelings for me before, but we never came out and said it. I had a boyfriend at the time and wouldn't cheat, so here I am. Harry, if you read this, I love you too. In short, worked for years with my possible soulmate, he confessed his love and I choked like a fool. Today I learned that girls will still say no to being asked out even if they like you and are available. So remember, no matter how much you think she likes you, asking her out is still just like starting a hardest difficulty game of Minesweeper on the smallest map. At an end of summer party, this nice guy gave me his number. I was very shy and kept putting off calling him because I was nervous. Then I got caught up in the excitement of starting my first year at university and I honestly just forgot about it. Passed him months later in the hallway at university and he gave me this incredibly wounded puppy dog look and kept walking. I felt terrible. I hadn't thought it was a big deal for him. I know now it's pretty much always a big deal for a guy to work up that sort of courage. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. In high school, I had a huge crush on this one guy, but he was one of the popular guys and I wasn't. But as luck would have it, we sat beside each other in sophomore English and he must have thought I was pretty funny because he was laughing at all my jokes. Fast forward to the end of the year, he and his girlfriend broke up and after class we held hands all the way to the bus stop. I was so freaking shy that I bolted when he tried to kiss me. We didn't talk much afterwards and I regret being shy. I guarantee nobody is ever happy about how shy they once were. I said no to a perfectly lovely guy who was just my type once because I was feeling a bit down and not like I could deal with a world of romance. I mentioned this to my best friend in passing one day and it transpired that they knew each other. My best friend managed to dig me out of my shell enough to at least go out for a quick drink with him. 2 years later, I walked down the aisle towards him. We're now fulfilling a lifelong dream of mine by living in another country together and have a life full of love and adventure planned. Obviously, I'd never have known this to regret it, but it's incredible to think how different my life would be if I'd stuck with my original no. Is anyone else watching this hoping to find one about yourself? Every single person, yes. He was a skater boy. I said, see you later, boy. In college, there was a guy who asked me out who was weird and annoying, so I said no. Next year, he came back hot as F. Turns out he spent all summer working out. I regretted it until I invited him over one night and he stole my PS3 and my Yoda backpack. I'll add that I got the backpack back. He was roommates with a friend of mine. He actually wore the backpack around the next day and everyone knew it was mine. I feel like the worst part was the aftermath. I invited him over to hang out and once I was reminded of his weirdness, I sent him on his way. Then the next day, he told everyone we'd hooked up and wore the backpack as proof. I was known as the campus hussy, and he sold the PS3 and took out my roommate on a date. I have never said no to a guy that asked me out in a polite and respectful way. Obama asked me out when we were in high school. I thought he was too skinny and I let him down by saying, "You have more chance of becoming president than getting in my pants." Turns out he became president to impress you and prove that he's willing to do anything for you. One of these days he'll show up at your house with a bouquet of beautiful flowers and gifts. He'll tell you how he never really loved Michelle and that you are the only person he could ever see himself with. I'd imagine that, after dating for a few years, you'll go through a rough patch that will end with a kiss in the rain at a train station with a proposal. So, I'm actually the guy in this story, but once I asked a girl in chem lab out at college. Turned out she had a boyfriend, but her smile when I asked her was bigger than I've seen from girls who said yes. I, a female, used to work at a big concert arena. It was a terrible job, and my personal relationship was really on the rocks, so my daily life wasn't the greatest at the time. But one night, this guy came up to me and said, "I just wanted to tell you that you're the most beautiful person here. Would you maybe want to go out sometime?" Which is so freaking sweet. But I turned cherry apple red and I didn't know what to say, so I turned him down. My relationship, with a total moron, might I add, failed within days of that, and I quit my job soon after. Things are great for me now. I'm with someone wonderful, but I occasionally think of that guy and how much hearing that impacted me. I hope he found someone awesome too. Remembering the people who give us these genuine compliments and how they moved us at the time can be a very good way for a quick confidence injection down the line, and actually help us in the long run more than people realize sometimes. I'm glad that it impacted you. He didn't ask me out, but we were super close. It was obvious that we both liked each other until my friends and I were playing a game where you'd have to say who you preferred to date more in the group of friends. It was my turn, and I jokingly said a different guy. Of course, he was so shocked, and it was only a few days later that I realized my dumb mistake. I was so frustrated at myself that I didn't talk to him for a long time. We talk a bit now, but he has a girlfriend. So much regret. In short, don't be afraid to tell the truth. I do realize that this was one of the dumbest mistakes I've ever made. I understand that some of you guys feel that I'm rude and stupid, and I can't argue with you there. On the other hand, I'm considering telling him, but I'm afraid that it'll spread like crappy gossip. Anyway, thanks for listening. I had a really good male friend in high school who, to put it lightly, got around a lot. We were really close. He'd tell me everything about his escapades with a variety of girls, some of whom I knew and some of whom were much older. Despite all of these conversations, I started to fall for him. Underneath his reputation was someone kind and loving to all his friends. He was the type who'd do anything for anyone. He was a great father figure to his younger siblings and was essentially the man of the house. Junior year, he revealed that he was starting to like me. He asked if I would be his date to our friend's annual New Year's party. But I was an assuming, ignorant witch, and I brushed it off. I was hurt that he'd try to get in my pants. I thought I meant more to him than just another girl to mess around with. I never told him how I felt about him. Instead, I cut off ties and started to distance myself from him little by little with no explanation. He would try to talk to me, but I'd try my hardest to avoid him altogether. I went away to college and he stayed in our hometown. After too much time thinking, I realized that what I did was immature. Recently, we started talking again, and I apologized for being a huge witch. He told me he knew I'd come around again, but I'm happy to know he really does care for me still. He doesn't know it, but I'm going to go back home tonight for Christmas. I plan on surprising him. I'm going to ask him to be my date to the New Year's Eve party our friend has every year. Update: he already knew where the conversation was heading, the cocky jerk, and said yes. I'm so lucky things have fallen into place. I can't wait to see where things take us, and thanks everyone for your support. Well, I met a beautiful Italian architect when I was studying abroad. He kept in touch over Facebook. As soon as I was single again, he sent me a message telling me he'd pay for my flights to Vienna where his parents live. Then we'd move to his flat in Paris. I said no, my education was too important. He got married to a gorgeous Russian girl a couple of months later. Their wedding was something straight out of a fairy tale. I would make the same decision again, but damn, do I wonder what my life would be like. Wait, he married a couple of months later? As soon as he was single, he contacted you, went straight to offering to pay for a plane ticket, got married just a couple of months ago? You can stop wondering. You'd have had a fairy tale wedding, had crazy bedroom life for a few months, got into big fights because he's too passionate or emotional, and you probably are too since you regret saying no. You'd destroy all the dishes by throwing them on the ground and finally divorce. Then he'd probably rekindle with a certain Russian friend. Long story short, you've probably dodged a bullet, and don't be surprised if you hear from him in 2 years. A friend of mine has this cousin who I thought was top-tier frickin' gorgeous for years. I always told my friend how handsome I thought he was, but I never really spoke to him, and he never paid me much attention, so I figured he wasn't interested. Relatively recently, he broke up with a girl he was dating, and spent a while just hanging around me and hitting on me. I'm in a serious relationship, so it wasn't going to happen, and he knew that. But all I could think was, where the frick was this a while back? I totally regret not being able to say yes after that long. Way back in middle or high school, kids didn't really ask kids out. But I did hear that a kid had a crush on me, and my response was less than inviting. So nothing ever came of that, naturally. Fast forward 10 years later, and now I find him very attractive, wishing I'd been more open to his crush back then. Now he's married, and I'm sitting in single girl sweatpants in my apartment. Maybe I'd be in my married girl sweatpants in my villa if I hadn't been such a prude back then. A guy asked out a girl I work with a while back. She said no, very rudely. She's very materialistic. Certainly a gold digger. That guy ended up being Luke Wilson, tight end for the Super Bowl champion Seattle Seahawks. She is very regretful. One night, a long time ago on Facebook Messenger, a boy asked me out. I was just under 2 months into my freshman year of college. He was still in high school, so I said no. I couldn't do the long distance, nor did I want to be tied down or feel guilty with all the partying. We still hang out a few times a year, yet we never bring up that conversation. Nope. When I was younger, I said yes to everyone I was even remotely attracted to, and subsequently got to be an expert at extricating myself from any sort of relationship. Eventually, it got to be too much hassle, and I just allowed myself to be single for a good long while. Because I just didn't want to have to dump or get dumped or tell my stories to even one more new person. I did, however, have a big regret about dumping this one guy. We're actually dating again, but it's been more than 25 years since we dated the first time. So much time lost. No, I can't say I said no to anyone who asked. Did I wish I'd just grabbed that brown-eyed idiot who was in all of my classes and told them how I felt? Yes, with my whole being. I had a boyfriend and we were in the early happy stage of the relationship. I went to leave for work one day and was waiting at a bus stop when a guy crossed the street to come ask me out. I said something dumb like, "Sorry, I have a boyfriend." Soon after that, the boyfriend I had made me realize he wasn't the right person for me. I was a housekeeper back then, and people tend to give the housekeeper liquor at Christmas. I had a very nice collection going on, put about 12 bottles on top of the fridge. My boyfriend drank them all within a week. I broke up with him because I just wasn't down for alcoholism. I always wished I'd said yes to the guy at the bus stop because he'd clearly been someone interesting and kind. But years went by, I met my husband, and now I'm not interested in anyone else. What secret did you hide from your spouse that nearly wrecked your relationship? I hid that I was $10,000 in debt. Before we were together, I made great money, had few living expenses, and the world was good. Paid cash for almost everything. While dating, I'd buy her gifts regularly or we'd go out to dinner and a show. I had a project car that I worked on constantly. Once we got married and bought a house, had kids, etc., living expenses went up, but my wages didn't go up as much. Don't get me wrong, we were paying the bills, but there just wasn't as much disposable income. Over time, I continued living the way I had been, with gifts, projects, guy toys and stuff, and slowly debt started to rack up. Most of it went on credit cards, and when she asked me where I was getting things, it was usually that I bought them used or traded something else or that I'd saved up. All my direct deposits went to my bank account. I had sources of income from work bonuses when I was on call that I wouldn't tell her about and send off to the cards to keep them off my back. Since this wasn't a regular source of income, I was always dreading a phone call asking where this month's payments were. One night, such a call came and I didn't pick up the phone. But my wife did. It was concerning a late payment to a card that my wife didn't know about. They wouldn't tell her the balance on the card for privacy reasons, but the cat was pretty much out of the bag. To some, $10,000 may not sound like a lot of money, and to us at that time it really wasn't. It was the loss of trust, the hiding, the lying, and the cloak and dagger of it all. Selling stuff on eBay to get money to make minimum payments. We did work through it, and it made our marriage stronger. We made a plan to fix things financially and worked together on my spending issues. It took time to rebuild the trust, but I still to this day wish I would have told her sooner or never let it happen in the first place. My boyfriend hid his niche bedroom interest from me. He likes to be watched while he strokes it. I found out when I googled his username and webcam sites came up for him. He said he didn't consider it cheating, so I guess it falls into this category. We talked about it and I suppose it's mostly better, but I still have trouble trusting him now. The stupidest thing is that if he had been open and honest, we could have explored our options together, but he was too ashamed. We'd talked about what we were into before because I have some things of my own, so that's why this was so surprising and hurtful to me. We've moved on, but every now and then I think about it and it still bothers me a bit. He told me he kept it from me because he felt it would upset me. It only upset me because he kept it from me. The story's lesson here is to be open and honest with your significant other, even if you're embarrassed. Okay, so reading some of the other answers, I can only think, my God, I am so lame. The only thing that I kept from my wife was the fact that I was letting a local stray cat in the house. Our lease stipulates no pets. My hope was that when we could move in a couple of years, we'd take the cat with us. My wife came home earlier than expected one day and was angry that I not only let the cat in the house, but that I let it on the bed. Well, this is more cute than anything, which is why I'm giving myself this mini break of wholesomeness before what is likely to be a deluge of hurt feelings and shameful secrets. So actually, I'm the mad spouse. My husband and I split bills. One thing he takes care of is insurance on the house and car. We pay the insurance a year at a time, so we went into the agency, got it all taken care of, and paid in full. About 8 months later, a huge hailstorm came through town, and the siding, roof, and our cars got beat to crap. I called the insurance company, and they said they'd cancelled our policy back in January. Apparently, they'd tried to contact my husband, but he's bad at returning phone calls and opening his mail because, quote, he didn't want to deal with it. They needed some extra documentation, which was never provided, so they charged us a fee, which was never paid, and then they dropped us. So, we're personally on the tab for $9,000 in damages to our property, and it took months to find an insurance company willing to insure us since we've been without for more than 60 days. We have to pay high premiums on everything for the next year. I've never been so angry about anything in my entire life, and seriously thought about ending the marriage. I'm still annoyed when I think about it, but now I just take charge of opening our mail and keeping on top of things. The house siding won't get fixed for a while and the cars will stay dented, but the roof is done and the windows are finally repaired. Baby steps. I've never told my spouse just how much my hobby really costs. I was offered a substantial amount of money for my company, and I turned it down in the same conversation. It would have been a windfall of cash, but there were stipulations that I was not willing to agree to. The offer was from a friend and ex-employer. His company was a similar business and at least 5 times my size. The biggest caveat was that if I went with the deal, I'd have to agree to 10 years of employment. So, I'd still be running my company, as well as working for the larger company. There would have been tremendous pressure on me to show a return on the investment. That's where morals come in. There's more money to be made by wading into the grey areas of the law and occasionally crossing the line of legality. That was a major reason I left that company and started my own in the first place. I went home and told my wife about it, and she was deeply hurt that I didn't include her in the decision. I saw it as simply another business decision like I make every day without her input. Had I been offered more money up front, with the ability to walk away from it and retire, I probably would have consulted my wife, only because I would have struggled with the decision then. And it wouldn't even have been the first time I asked her advice about a business decision I needed input on. But yeah, she's annoyed with me for that one. My ex was one of those legit, crazy, overthinking, overanalyzing types that gets super jealous real quick. Anyway, I was in my last semester of college and going for my degree in secondary education. I was student teaching. My birthday is in early September, which is obviously during the school year, and one of my students got me a little coffee mug as a present. I loved it and thought it was so sweet. When I excitedly showed my ex, she freaked out and accused me of flirting and fooling around with my students. Yeah. Fast forward a couple of months and I was just about to graduate and leave student teaching. On my last day, several of my students got me farewell presents, ranging from letters to pens to a really nice tie. I hid all of it. Every single thing, because I knew what would happen if my partner found out. That in itself is really messed up, but I was disillusioned and, quote, in love at the same time. Either later that night or sometime shortly after, I was on the phone with my mum while my ex was in the room with me. I told my mum about all of the nice things my students got for me. Needless to say, my ex heard and freaked out again. It got ugly and I ended up feeling like I did something wrong for accepting the gifts. She was telling me how all of her friends thought it was super shady as well, which made me feel even worse. It was a messed up time. I'm so glad we aren't together anymore. That relationship made me insecure in the worst ways. And now I make a point of posting every gift I receive to my social media accounts just to show off. I took it upon myself to be in charge of the finances because I was raised that it was my manly duty to take care of the household. My girlfriend wasn't working at the time because we had 2 young kids, and we were both happy with her staying home and taking care of them. So I was the only income. It was minimum wage for a while until I got a job at a new restaurant that was doing very well. I was making 3 times what I was making before, and things were really starting to look up for us. We were finally off assistance and got to move out of our ghetto shack into a nice townhouse. I bought a new car with my bad credit that got me a horrible interest rate. We bought some shiny new furniture because now we had room. And then life kicked me in the gonads. The local economy tanked right around the time that some major chain restaurants opened up in our small town. Business took a huge dive and both my hours and my tips dropped off considerably. Now I was stuck with rent that was suddenly too high, a car payment that I should never have taken on, and I still had horrible credit, meaning that I had nothing to fall back on in case of an emergency. Then I got the bright idea that a payday loan would be a great idea. Not so much. This wouldn't have really been an issue except that I'd never shared any of this with my girlfriend. I took the burden on myself and tried to hide all of the financial struggles from her because I felt like a failure. I wasn't able to provide for my family. This, of course, led to countless arguments about me not treating her like an equal. She told me that it hurt her that I wouldn't communicate with her or share the burden. I'd make an effort for a couple of weeks, then go back to keeping quiet. It was about pride for me. It got to the point that I dreaded the mail coming. I feared the phone. The only thing we got in the mail was bills that I couldn't afford, and the only people that called were collection agencies or the bank, asking when I'd be making my out-of-control car payment. I didn't understand at the time what a true partnership was. Most of the stress at the time wasn't from the other end of the phone line, it was fear of her finding me not good enough. All she wanted was to share the burden. She didn't look down on me because we were struggling financially, she was hurt that I was trying to do it without her. It took a long few years to scratch back, and I could never have done it on my own. I just wish that I'd taken her words to heart sooner. It would have been much easier. Sounds like a horrifically tough time for any couple to go through, but full credit to both of you on pulling through it and coming out with a better relationship and ways to deal with problems going forward. Wow. I hid that I quit my job and wasn't fired. Also, I was scared to tell him my coworker had attempted the unspeakable act on me. I told him 2 or 3 days later, and he and my parents convinced me to call the police. I was scared he'd think I'd cheated or something, or that it was my fault. We got that guy put behind bars though, and I'm glad I told him. A 15-year smack addiction. I made decent money for the first 14 years or so I was able to hide it. I got laid off, so the money got tight. However, my addiction wasn't concerned with my lack of funds. I started selling all that was mine and then all that was my family's. It only got worse from there until the authorities got involved. Something I hid from my ex-wife was that I liked stuff in the butt, like beads and whatnot. I found out this little thing about myself while I was with her because she wouldn't do the deed with me for long periods of time, so I started exploring into how I could satisfy myself and not cheat. When she found out, she made fun of me and shamed me every chance she got. We didn't get divorced because of that, but it hurt a lot to be shamed by the only person I had in the world at the time. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. We aren't married, but we do live together. Anyway, he's a super healthy, crunchy yoga addict. We have no meat in the house and basically live off rice and beans. So, whenever he's gone out of town for work, I'm home alone, baby. I'll order pizza delivery. The box will be in the trash can by the time he gets back. I also go to drive-thrus on the sly. I throw everything away so my car doesn't smell and he doesn't know. Receipts and all. No evidence. I do feel kind of guilty, but we don't have joint accounts or anything like that. I never promised to give up meat or certain foods, so I guess I'm not lying to him. Do you eat hamburgers? What? No, hiccups Onion Breath. I pay my way just fine, so I figure what I do with my money is my business, right? My husband was extremely stressed out and his poor mum needed $2,000 that we couldn't help with. So, without telling him, I went around to local stores and worked out a deal selling cookies and brownies to raise some money for his mum. I didn't tell my husband about it. I wanted to get the money first. I didn't want him thinking all day about if the cookies and brownies sold. When he found out, he flipped his crap, saying I was sneaking around behind his back and how dare I. I really thought I was doing something good. I should mention that this all happened about 5 or 6 years ago. At the time, my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, had went from working every day to being disabled and it messed him up for a while. He thought he was no longer a man. I knew nothing about pride and ego and all of that stuff, and he just wasn't dealing with it in the best ways. He made me feel like scum. It went on for about a month until one night I just couldn't take it anymore. While crying my eyes out, I told him that since I was such a horrible person, then the best thing for him was to leave and find someone better. He could either leave me or get over it. I couldn't handle being yelled at every day anymore. Somehow, we worked it out, but son of a witch, it was really hard. Now we have a great marriage and we've learned how to be a real team. I tell him everything, even the things he doesn't want to know. I quit smoking a few years ago. I'd smoked for like 7 years and it was just time. My wife was my girlfriend back then. Anyway, I started to have serious issues at work and was struggling with a lot of stuff and I just cracked and brought a pack of cigs. One thing led to another, I lost my job and all that crap, and I started smoking again, but hiding it from her. I didn't want to let her down, and I think for the most part I was just ashamed. Anyway, she totally busted me smoking, and I came clean about it, and she was really angry. Obviously, she started on the whole, "What else are you hiding from me?" thing. I don't know how to ease her mind, and I feel really bad. I hope she'll come around and forgive me for hiding it. I failed last semester at school. I didn't want to tell him because we had vacation planned in May that he was really looking forward to because of his stress from work. I also knew he couldn't wait for me to graduate because he wanted to move. It was such a big deal to him, and I couldn't face disappointing or upsetting him. After vacation, there was a wedding we had to attend, so I planned to tell him after that. Then we had a concert to go to that we'd bought tickets for with friends the winter before. I kept putting it off because by now it had been months since I didn't share the information. Obviously, the best time to tell him about my screw-up was in the beginning, but I didn't. When I finally told him, the new semester was starting and he was still under the impression that I was going to school. But I wasn't because I had to wait a semester per school policy. I finally told him, and now, after 4 years, we're no longer together. I seriously screwed that one up. The secret came from a man I was dating with serious intent a few years ago. When I met him, I knew he was a bit down on his luck and had had run-ins with the law. He said he was a changed man and just wanted to provide for his family by working a normal job. He was working in construction, seemed to be doing well, and we were happy. A few months into our relationship, I got an acceptance letter to college out of the province. We decided to try to do the long-distance thing, and off I went. About 2 weeks after I moved away, I got a call from my brother. He told me he had been spending time with this mutual friend of mine and my boyfriend's, and he, my brother, was worried about me. Apparently, my boyfriend had just been released from jail prior to us getting together. He was basically jailed for large-scale substance and human trafficking. Also, he was still actively pimping people out and was trying to get me on the hook so he could pimp me out as well. To say I was shocked is an understatement. Needless to say, I never spoke to that boyfriend again. After over 10 years of marriage and 2 kids, I had a drastic change in religious conviction, from born-again Christian to agnostic. It took 1 full year before I told her, or anyone else in my life for that matter. I live in the Bible Belt, and being a believer was a firm part of my identity. It's been a year since I told her, and it has been tough. She's gone from considering leaving to acceptance. I've told probably 7 or 8 other people in my life. My brother is the only one in my family that actually knows, but I've been feeling it's about time to change that. I won't mind the questions or challenges, they'll be much better than my lies or omissions. So, who wrote this question? Nice try, wife. Nice try. I draw and animate cartoon smut for a living. I pretend to be a freelancer to everyone that knows me in real life. As a working voice actor, from time to time you get auditions for R-rated material coming up, and honestly, I've done a few auditions but never got the roles. And although I'd have the same policy as you when it came to generally telling my friends that I was a voiceover and not going into specifics, I don't think I'd have any trouble telling my partner. Just gotta stop your parents from finding the really smutty stuff. I got a small raise a few months back, which equated to something like an extra $70 per paycheck. I didn't tell her about it because I put it towards paying off the debt we have. If I told her, it would have been allocated to her screw-up of a brother. My partner had told me he got kicked out 3 or 4 times just for being a crap, jobless high school dropout and fighting with his parents. Turns out it was because he physically attacked his mother. I only found this out 2 years into our 3-year relationship after he started attacking me and his parents became aware. I found out from my parents who found out from his parents. It was kind of crushing. Oh, and that he still loved all of his exes and he fantasized about them. I found out about that through him talking in his sleep. Anyway, the biggest lie I kept from him was that I owned a credit card and I was about $1,500 in debt. Didn't tell him because he always took my money. My ex got really upset when he found out how much I flicked the old bean, especially after we'd done the deed. And that was a lot to deal with. It wasn't that he couldn't get me happy in the bedroom, but I'd get really into it for long after we'd done and would end up sneaking off all day just to have some more fun. We'd been together for about 2 years, so I can understand why hiding it would annoy him. I just didn't know it was a problem. I thought all women did this. I started collecting inflatables and doing the deed with them. My wife found out. We started doing the deed on the inflatables and kind of tripled our amount of bedroom time overnight. Now I sell custom inflatables as a side business and it looks like I can quit my day job real soon. I managed to hide my Pokemon addiction from my significant other for the first 6 months of our relationship. I don't think the word Pokemon was mentioned once in all of that time. I live and breathe Pokemon. I wrote my master's dissertation on it. Significant other thought she had found a nice, sensible person. Once we were serious and semi-settled down, it all came spilling out. I did my best to stagger the revelations, but once the floodgates opened up, there was no closing them. The worst was when I changed my Facebook display picture to the Pokemon trainer and refused to change it back. We're still happily together, and now I try to delay my Pokemon activities until after she's fallen asleep. When we were first married, we were poor as heck. I couldn't afford a big diamond, so instead I brought a little bit of gold bullion and had a friend, who had just graduated from dental school and had both the tools and the skill, make the gold into custom wedding rings. Fast forward 10 years and we're pregnant with our second child, and I want to do something really special for her. So I start saving a little from reimbursed travel expenses and from sales commission checks every month until I have what I think I need. So I decided to have a special ring commissioned and made especially for her. It has birthstones of our 2 children and a larger diamond, my birthstone, in the middle. My oldest child is 2, so I know her birthstone, and we have the approximate due date for the one we're expecting, so I'm pretty sure I know what his birthstone will be. I carefully chose loose stones for all 3 and then worked with a guy about an hour away from my home who makes custom jewelry to design the ring that will have all 3 stones in it in just the way I want them arranged. The jeweler makes it in time for the expected due date of our second, and I carry it everywhere in my pocket waiting for her to go into labor. The day comes, she delivers a healthy baby boy, joy ensues, happy, happy, happy. When she finally gets to go to a private room to rest and we have no visitors, I pull it out and give it to her, expecting tears of happiness. Instead, she says, "What the hell is that? Where did you get it? And how the holy hell did you pay for that?" I'm stunned, but stammer out that I've been putting a little money away for a while so I could surprise her. For the next few months, she was really angry at me for, quote, hiding money from her. This is filed under no good deed goes unpunished. She used this incident for years as proof that I was deceitful and untrustworthy. Frick my life. We were divorced a few years later. This kind of thing was a pattern with her. I bought flowers home for her one time for no special reason, and she complained a lot about how much they cost. We could easily afford them because they were like $20. Another time on our anniversary, I arranged a surprise overnight stay at a spa and resort with a popular restaurant attached. I'd taken care of an overnight babysitter, had checked into the room in advance so I had a key in my pocket, I tipped off the valet so he knew when we arrived for dinner that we'd actually be staying overnight, and I had flowers and champagne ready in the room before we arrived. She thought we were just going out to dinner and commented it would be fun to stay here sometime. I pulled out the key and said, "How about tonight? It's all arranged." And she was furious that I'd done all of this in prep, quote, behind her back, and accused me of trying to manipulate her into being obligated to do the deed. I absolutely was unable to do anything nice or romantic for this person I was married to for 18 years. What's the craziest last will and testament that you had to deal with? I worked at an attorney office and had a little old lady give her house and belongings to a bus driver. The bus driver was nice to her and would help her. We were all waiting for all heck to break loose when her family found out. They could maybe contest it on the basis of her mental health, but when I was a witness to the signing, she seemed fine and knew the answers to the questions, so she wasn't having severe mental problems as far as we could tell. If I recall correctly from my trusts and estates class, a better way to ensure someone gets nothing, the decedent should have something to the effect of, "I leave, family member name, my love," or give them a paltry sum like $1. "To son A, I give my house, to son B, I give my boat, and to son C, I give $1. Military lawman here. Had a young client come in for a will before deployment. He put in a request to be buried in blue jeans, a Chris Jericho t-shirt, and his replica WWE championship belt. Happily, this airman didn't meet any misfortune on his deployment. My brother used to be a paralegal, and he said that a group of 3 siblings, I believe 2 brothers and a sister, almost came to blows because the inheritance didn't divide into 3 evenly. There were 2 pennies left over. Not a lawyer, but a paralegal. We had a dying client in the hospital change her will by recording it on a smartphone. It set a precedent and made the local paper. The lawyer in question has the page from the newspaper framed in his office. When I was doing my upper year contracts course in uni, we covered a case where a farmer had gotten stuck under his tractor. He thought no one would find him in time, so he carved, "I leave it all to my wife," and it was deemed a legal last will and testament by the courts. I would imagine the phone recording would be the same. I'm not a lawyer, but I had an experience with this years ago. Rich uncle of mine, real crazy, and not in a good way. He'd come to visit us when we were kids, maybe once every 10 years. Last time he did, he brought us to a Denny's. He met my brother in an airport, was there for an hour before he got on another plane, and went home. When he died, he had no friends. He'd driven his wife to basically drink herself to death a few years prior. He left his entire estate to an Elvis impersonator. Everything. 2 sons of a really wealthy couple go to the family lawyer to have the will read. The lawyer is super nervous. He's known them both since they were kids. One son gets the entire inheritance and the other gets nothing. The explanation was that it should be passed through to the blood relative only. So that was the day the one son found out he was adopted. What garbage adoptive parents. I mean, why adopt a kid if you aren't going to treat them as your own? Although you could argue that maybe he at least got a good upbringing that way, the fact that they could be so callous about how he found out about it is pretty awful. I work for a lawyer who does wills. We've had a lady put in her will that one of her adult sons was not to receive his share until he visited a dentist, and the other son lost £70. Another lady put in her will that she wanted her cats cremated with her when she died. I told her that's not going to happen. Human remains and animals, dead or alive, do not get cremated at the same time. So she settled on being cremated separately and joined together, then buried together. Typically, wills are about 10 pages, for the average person. We had a lady who had a 56-page will. She detailed everything from her house to people. The wooden ladle goes to Agnes. The toilet paper holder goes to Tim. Magazine basket to John Paul II. For every single item in this lady's house. We had a man put in his will that his family was to go to the zoo immediately after his burial. That day. We thought that one was more heartwarming. We had a lady that told us to put in her will that she wanted to be buried on her property next to her husband. She lived on a small rural property. Totally illegal to have human remains buried there. Refused to tell us whether her husband was cremated or not and dictated that she did not want to be cremated. Her husband had died 5 or 6 years prior, so it's not as though it was 50 years where things like that might have been a little overlooked. We work with many people from a certain religion. A lot of people we do wills for leave at least 90% of their estates to the church instead of their families. The so-called Great Stork Derby was when a wealthy Canadian left a substantial amount of money to whichever woman had the most children in the 10 years following his death. It was upheld through numerous court battles, and 4 women tied with 9 children each. 2 women were also given smaller payouts. One had 10 children, 2 of whom didn't make it, and another had more than 9 kids, but a couple of those weren't with her husband, which was a grey area. The guy also had some other interesting things in his will and was a known practical joker. He willed the use of a vacation home in Jamaica to 3 lawyers known for hating each other's guts. Upon the eventual deaths of all of them, probably at the hands of each other, the proceeds from its sale were to be distributed among the poor of that city. Luckily for the 3 lawyers, he actually just decided to sell the house during his lifetime. 1 share of the O'Keefe Brewery Company was bequeathed to every practicing Protestant minister and Orange Lodge in Toronto. The brewery was a Catholic firm, and the man didn't actually own the stock he was giving away in his will, which ultimately made this clause moot. Would ministers who raged against demon rum pocket their principles long enough to make a grab for the stock? Would Orangemen take anything from the hated Catholics? Sadly, we never found out. I was in rehab with a guy whose grandmother left him $2.5 million if he could quit smack for 2 years. He'd have to wear one of those patches that the courts use for probations the entire time, which are exceptionally hard to fool. $2.5 million? Slam dunk, right? This was in 2007. The last time I saw him was in 2013, nodded the F out in a Fleabag motel while I left to pick up another baggie. I got arrested, made the decision to quit, and never saw him again. Who knows, maybe since then he's cleaned up. The local newspaper ran a story with pictures of a house that was left to a cat when the owner died. The cat was the only occupant. The woman's lawyer maintained the house for the cat from the deceased owner's trust fund. I always wondered if there might have been a little motivation to hasten Kitty's demise. Honestly, probably not if you get to charge billable hours to go feed a cat. That's a sweet gig and probably a nice break from office work. I can just see the letter now. Dear Mr. Tittles, I trust this finds you well. Please find below Beagle & Beagle's fees and costs for Junior Associate McSlavington attending to your matters. 2 hours researching current trends in cat food, $700. 1 hour travel from office to Whole Foods, $350. An hour's travel from Whole Foods to Mr. Tittle's residence, $350. 3.5 hours attending to the well-being of Mr. Tittles, $1,225. 6 minutes general admin on estate, research into animals as beneficiaries tax rules, petitioning state legislatures on amendment to tax code, consultation with Veterinarian Society of America on lobbying efforts, drafting letter to Congress as interested party on behalf of Mr. Tittles/VSOA, follow-up calls, $35. Disbursements, cat food, $30, gas, $5. Total, $2,695. We look forward to payment on our standard 30-day term and thank you again for choosing Beagle and Beagle for your legal services in this competitive market. Sincerely, Beagle Sr. There's a famous UK case. One of the richest men in the world at the time died during the journey between his solicitor and his country estate, all because he forgot his glasses. It took lawyers just over 100 years to spend the entire estate in legal fees. My dad is a lawyer, and a friend of my grandpa, who was in his 80s and had end-stage cancer, made his will. He was a big fan of weapons and wanted to give them to my dad, who's a fan as well. He left my dad 2 shotties, a Glock, and a revolver. My dad told him it would be better to write it in the will because my country's law says you can only own 5 weapons at a time. My dad already had 4 at the time, so he'd have to give some up, but if you inherit them, it doesn't add to the limit. So, they made a testament and he gave him the weapons except for the revolver, because apparently it was his favorite and he didn't want to give it away yet. My dad instantly knew why, but didn't say anything. 2 weeks later, the guy decided he didn't want to live through long, cancer-ridden deterioration and used the revolver to speed things along. My dad still hasn't gotten the weapon because the police still have it. He never told my grandpa that he knew he didn't want to take this guy's chance of finishing on his own terms instead of waiting for the cancer to win. I was witness to one where a lady wanted to make sure her daughter divorced her husband when she had no intentions of doing so. She'd have to do it if she wanted her part of the estate. Thankfully, that's not legally enforceable, so nothing came of it. My great-grandmother did this, left everything to her daughters and granddaughters. The will stated explicitly that they were to use the money to get a divorce. My mum was like, "I don't want a divorce?" And the lawyer was like, "Yeah, we can't enforce that. Here's your money." So my mum and my dad spent the money updating their house. There are very valid reasons why parents or onlookers might want someone they know to end a toxic marriage, but yeah, it turns out you can't force someone who doesn't make moves to leave it themselves. You can lay out your concerns, keep an eye on things, but legally, turns out there's not all that much you can do despite that. I mean, it's not that crazy, it's depressingly predictable. Rich old aunt, the only one in her huge family with any money, having been a doctor on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, she set up a living trust to take care of her poor relations in the Philippines, to continue as a death trust whenever she died. Her favorite niece was in control of the trust, and of course the niece was responsible and even-handed, and never embezzled any of the money to set herself up as a newspaper publisher and concert producer and media mogul with expensive new cars and lots of first-class Pan-Pacific travel. Nope, not that lady. Of course the trustee did all of that. Hundreds of thousands of dollars missing and an unholy mess of sifting through money transfers and property purchases in 3 countries. The niece also had a bigamous marriage to some guy in the Philippines, to whom she sent buckets of her aunt's money to build a luxury villa, while her legal husband in North America was bedridden and dying slowly. She vehemently denied such a relationship existed. She also had photos of her Philippines wedding on her Facebook page. Not the smartest embezzler out there. From where I sat, in the attorney's office representing the poor relations trying to stop the trustee's embezzlement, the craziest part of it all was that after years of fighting, we finally got complete financial disclosure for the trust on like December 22nd, and it was such a Christmas miracle that I almost put off my Christmas trip to New York City to gleefully pore through every poorly redacted line of it. Also, we had the rich old aunt's ashes sitting on our bookshelf for years, since the dispute about what to do with her remains was a part of this all. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Fairly new lawyer here, I haven't had that much in wills. Family is where the real fun is. But we did have a woman with dementia come in to do her will, then come in a few months later to change it because her condition was worsening. I did do a capacity assessment and she seemed to understand what her old will said and what her new will would say, and why she was changing it. She wasn't suddenly cutting anyone close out, so I made the changes she requested, told her okay, but I warned her that I might not be able to make future changes due to concerns about her condition. A week later, she comes back in, and she is in rough shape. She remembers me, but her eyes are watering, she has trouble explaining what's going on. I realize she's not even trying to change her will, she's just sort of here because she's scared about the changes in her head. So I get in touch with the person supposed to be caring of her. I talk over her will one more time, and I tell her she's done everything right, her will is safe, her family knows where it is, a few other things. When I said goodbye, I told her I hoped to see her again, and she smiled and said she didn't think we would. I teared up a little then. We'd laughed and chatted through her original will, discussed the best way to do things. Seeing this formerly confident and witty woman, still keeping it together but obviously so concerned, and knowing it was a one-way downward path, it just sucked. I don't know how she's doing now. I have a grandpa who set up his will to divide his estate between his and his wife's families. He remarried. Pretty normal so far, right? The stupid part is that rather than splitting his half between the 3 children, he did per capita to be distributed after his wife passed. So we currently have a 9-way split and likely to do 10 to 15 ways before it's actually settled. Where I went to college, there's an oak tree that was deeded to itself in a man's will. Now called the tree that owns itself, it sits in the middle of a road and you have to go to one lane to drive around it. The story is that a man loved the tree so much as a kid that around the time he died in the 1830s, he gave the tree possession of itself. This technically wouldn't stand up in a court of law, but the county and local populace has accepted it and takes care of it. The original tree actually died and the current one is a product of one of the acorns of the original. Estate lawyer here. I could tell so many stories. Sisters fighting over deceased brother's dining room table, ending in an accusation that one had murdered her own husband. True believers who were convinced the rapture was imminent and only saw the value of completing their estate plan when I explained the mess those of us left behind would have to deal with, including their stuff. A guy who got married days before his death to a longtime girlfriend. It's a long story. He did a will, disinherited several kids but not all of them, and somehow everything worked out okay with minimal disagreement. Several stories where a family member is a lawyer who practices in another area of law in another state, or doesn't practice at all. Guaranteed craziness. I could go on and on. It's absolutely the best line of work, it's really fulfilling with great stories. You get to know families and walk meaningful paths alongside them. Not a lawyer, but when my dad was growing up, there was this little old lady across the street without any family. She was from Finland, and her husband died during World War II. She immigrated to the States and had nobody. So my grandparents would knock on her door to chat, take her grocery shopping, stuff like that. They made my dad and brother help out around the house and yard. She loved my dad and uncle, treated them like her own kids, with cookies and treats and presents. When my dad was in Vietnam, she'd record him voice messages on tapes and send them to him with letters, telling him what life was like in the neighborhood and how she'd hoped he'd be home safe soon, and that she prayed for him, stuff like that. When he came home, he'd stop by to chat and help out around the house, bring her macaroons, and just sit and talk for a while. One day, old Mrs. Lingard died and a lawyer called my grandparents. She'd left them a sizable amount of cash and stock, and her paid-off house to my dad and his brother. My family had thought she was penniless. Never underestimate how much little, simple things can mean to people. You just might be one of the best things in their life. I saw a couple giving $100,000 to the next caretakers of their pets. I have a statement in mind saying that my sister will be awarded $10,000 to care for my cat if something happens to me. But that's just because he has a lot of medical issues and his vet bills can reach $1,000 pretty quick each time anything happens, and I don't want her going into debt taking care of my pet. I know that I should have a more real-life-based commentary, but all of these posts about people leaving stuff to their animals are just making me think of the Aristocats and how ridiculous that wealthy old lady was for leaving all her money to her cats. Her aging butler seemed relatively nice until he learned he was getting screwed, and might have been happy to look after them as a condition of the will if she left him something as well. Sorry, I'll quit focusing on cartoons from the 90s and get back to the task at hand. This family didn't realize I had nothing to do with the will. One kept telling me to tell the deceased they were unhappy with their decisions. The deceased's ex-husband demanded that I tell the deceased she was a goddamn working girl. And the remaining son thanked me personally for gifting them the house. This large French farmer's family had been fighting each other for 15 years over their parents' estate, Everything and anything had been a weapon in this all-out war. Debts, spoils, barns, plots, cows, wills, whatever. Defeats followed victories, failures followed compromises, but progress was being made, and at some point the killing zone turned to a standstill. Everything was agreed as long as nobody talked antics, jewelry, furniture, kitchenware, photographs, laundry, or tools. A long, protracted peace ensued, any goodwill tentative harshly discouraged before even being aired. Time went on with no issue in sight. Then someone suggested they just drag all the stuff into the farm's courtyard, pour petrol on it, and set it all afire. Everyone agreed. Not so much the original will itself, but the aftermath and greed of the siblings. Almost none of them talk anymore. There are 10 of them total. They were fighting over a couple of 100 acres, most of which is swamp. The greed part is they wanted to have the original will amended. Every grandkid was supposed to get a portion in the original will, along with the siblings. However, the siblings nixed that via the courts. They were going to then split the property amongst themselves, but the executor just didn't give an F and let it sit for 30 years without doing anything. The rest wanted it done, so court cases, massive debt, finally the executor having control seized from them. Thanks to the court cases, though, the property was in massive debt, being held as collateral, and now they're all too old or dead to do anything about it. If the will had gone through as originally intended, the family, which consists of about 35 grandchildren, would have all been happy. Or at least had money for selling the property, which was probably worth about 35 grand per section. Now it's probably just going to go under eventually for non-payment. Even if I could buy some of it for cheap, I'm not touching it with a 100-mile pole. My school lucked into its art museum because of William Ackland's crazy will. He donated a ton of money to Duke for an art museum on the condition that he be buried in said museum. Duke noped out of that little clause and the money, so UNC happily accepted the gift, built the Ackland Art Center, and you can go see his tomb right there in it. I enjoy sharing this fun little trivia piece when I give tours. I read a will that was pretty normal up until the decedent asked that his cremated ashes be sprinkled on the crotches of well-endowed handsome boys. Maybe he was trying to be funny. Steady Ed Hedrick, the inventor of the Frisbee, had his ashes melted into some Frisbees. Oh, I have a crazy story. My grandma's sister was a narcissist and extremely vindictive. She and her husband gained a significant number of assets over the years, including a somewhat profitable farm with over 100 acres of fields. They had a few children, all boys, and they all had wives and children of their own. Her husband died about 6 years before she did. Somehow, in their 50 years of marriage and living on said farm, they'd never bothered to go to a lawyer and write a will. Instead, she wrote a note and left it in their safe of legal documents, saying that nothing was to go to the wife of one of her sons, who incidentally had died almost 20 years ago, or to her children. This because the son's wife was apparently more outspoken and wouldn't be controlled by the old bag. So she made it clear in her will that she absolutely despised her, and my entire family too. So everything went into probate, and the kids are still trying to get everything squared away a year later. But the people she wanted excluded might be getting some of it too. The Huguette Clark story is utterly fascinating to me. She died in 2011 at age 104. She was a wealthy recluse, a daughter of a copper baron, who hadn't seen any family since her mother had passed away. In 1963, she lived the last 20 years of her life in a hospital in Manhattan, having contact with only a handful of people, and she rarely had face-to-face interactions. Of her $300 million fortune, she gave most to charity, including her palatial estates, $30 million to her longtime nurse, $1 million to the hospital, money to the caretakers of said palatial estates, her accountant and lawyer, and nothing to her relatives. Except all of that was written in her second will, which was written 6 weeks after the first. 2 years of litigation from relatives who'd never met her later, and many of her charitable donations and bequeathments to those close to her were removed or greatly reduced. Of course, the lawyers of the relatives ensured that a large part of the settlement money went to themselves. My grandpa gave all of his belongings to my father, who was the youngest of 4 brothers and 3 sisters, while my grandma was still alive. Grandpa told Dad that he gave him everything rightfully because he believed my dad will split everything equally. Grandma wanted her property back. Dad at the time, only 20, obeyed his mum. Big frickin' court case several years later between all the brothers because it was indeed not evenly split. Still going strong to this day with no grandma around anymore. Grandpa was a wise man, he just miscalculated. I'm not a lawyer, but I have a sad story that fits here. My great-grandmother and grandfather had a will that would give their 6 kids a fair share when they both were dead. But my grandfather passed, and the oldest of the kids, the jerk, took it to court to get his part even if the will said that they'd get their share when both were dead. This made my great-grandmother lose everything. She didn't get to handle the sorrow of losing her husband, whom she'd been married to for 68 years. Instead, she had to go to court many times, and then she lost the house they'd built and almost everything she owned. We helped her get an apartment and tried to keep her happy. She deteriorated quickly after those months. I hate how someone can let greed come between families. I've never even met the jerk. When I was in law school, I heard about a case involving a generational trust. It says, "All my grandchildren get the money when the youngest reaches the age of 25. The youngest grandchild was 24, and they were all making plans for their inheritance. But, plot twist, one of the sons remarried and had a baby, a new heir, when the other grandchildren were 24. So, the rest of them had to wait until they were more than 50 to inherit. I asked if the baby had a bodyguard, and my friend didn't know." When did you accidentally come across as a complete badass? At work, there was this big burly former Marine/mercenary from Iraq who was back stateside, a massive mountain of a man. We came to face each other in one of the narrow corridors of the office where one of us was going to have to turn sideways. Neither of us turned, but we stopped. Now, I'm 6'1", 260 pounds, and he still towered over me. He was a nice guy, but still a little conditioned, I guess you could say, or mentally unhinged. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "You feeling froggy?" It was truly like something out of a movie. Without blinking, I replied, "You'd better jump." We both then cracked up and turned sideways, while the office breathed a collective sigh of relief. At work, project management undercut and mismanaged a project so badly. They pushed getting minimum viable product out with the goal to roll out improvements later, also known as the Bethesda approach. Product released, they all patted themselves on the back and moved on. Then that minimum viable product broke. In a meeting we had with our directors about how it's so broken and the cost to fix it, where we were told that there was no cost too big and unlimited manpower, among other things, I decided to ask, "So how come we couldn't afford to do it right, but we can afford to do it twice?" I'll never forget the moment a family walked into the local pub I was working at while I was there. This big, king-of-the-grill, bald alpha patriarch dad type and his wife and kids came through, and I said, "Welcome, where would you like to sit?" And he snapped back, "Well, a table would be nice." And without missing a beat at all, I replied, "Actually, we usually sit on the chairs here." I'll never forget the satisfaction of that moment or the look on his face. My uncles were talking crap about my dad, so I walked into the conversation and told them it wasn't polite to talk about people behind their backs. One of them turned to me and said I shouldn't interrupt when the men are speaking, and completely out of character, I replied, "I don't see any men in here." Boy, did I get some crap that day, but that's how I knew I won that exchange. I'm a 4th grade teacher, and one day I was up at the board and struggling to remember how to spell a particular word. I was trying to make light of it, telling the kids that sometimes adults need help with spelling too. One student replied, "It's because you were poorly educated, but don't worry, we're poorly educated too." Oof, double whammy. I genuinely can't tell if that kid is actually trying to own you or is a sweet but misguided soul. In any case, that's an absolute ego hammering you took that day. Rest in peace, you. I worked in cell phone sales for a few years, and a woman came in with a fairly new flip phone. This was 2018, so we barely still sold them. She was complaining because one of the sides of the screen was dangling off, and she said she didn't do anything, it just snapped, and demanded a new phone. I told her, "That looks like physical damage, and we don't have any coverage for that since you didn't buy a phone protection warranty." She insisted it wasn't physical damage and the phone just sucks and broke itself. She started freaking out and calling me all kinds of names and swinging her phone in my face, and then the top half of the phone literally snapped off and landed on the counter in front of me. I just looked her in the eyes and said, "Well, that was definitely physical damage." She lost her mind at my comment, and it was weirdly satisfying. Working retail, a Karen once told me she had hoped I'd die. I was so into work mode that I blankly responded, "I mean, we all die, that's not much of a threat." Maybe it was my lack of intimidation or my blank stare, but that really shut her up. I didn't realize the nature of my comment when I wrote it, but in high school, one of my teachers did end-of-the-year anonymous evaluations. Everyone hated him, and I understood why, but I still did well in his class. I wrote, "I don't have any critiques about your teaching, but I think you should work on being a better person." forensic biology professor brought out a fresh human brain as a surprise to a stunned class. He said, "You had no idea what I had to go through to get this." Someone asked, "Well, the skull, right?" When I was 12, my older sister had a boy over for Thanksgiving dinner. She dated a lot of D-bags, but this guy took the cake. Big, brash, annoying jerkhead who was rude to her and basically everyone. As we sat down for dinner, before we were about to say what we were thankful for, he says, "Looks like I'm seated at the head of the table. I must be important," with a huge crap-eating grin. Without pausing, I gestured to my dad, seated opposite him, and said, "Actually, my dad is at the head of the table. You're the butthole." My mum scolded me for swearing at the table, but years later told me her and my dad thought it was hilarious. After 4 years in a horrible toxic relationship, which turned into a 1-year horrible toxic marriage, I told my ex that I wanted a divorce. He told me that I couldn't divorce him or I'd go to hell. My response was, "Well, then I guess I'll see you there." I then kicked him out of my house, for which he'd never paid a dime in bills, and told him to call his mum for a plane ticket. Not the most badass story here, but it did feel good. I was around 17 or 18 and getting my first filling at the dentist. They pumped me full of nitrous oxide for pain and to help me relax during the procedure. The dentist came back and asked me, "How are you feeling?" All I said was, "I don't." And he lost his crap and cracked up for what seemed like 20 minutes before he could pull himself together. I also started laughing because of the laughing gas, and his laugh was infectious. So we were both just sitting in the room laughing, and all of his assistants came by and were very confused. Not me, but my daughter. This boy at school called her retarded, and her response? "No, I'm autistic. I don't know what your fricking excuse is." She was in 6th grade. I was pretty shocked when I got that phone call. She doesn't usually say things like that to people. I got real drunk when I was probably about 25, got in a bar fight, as was my habit, and got knocked out cold, which was also a bad habit I had back in those days. I woke up in an emergency room to a cop who said, "It's 4:30 a.m., you're in so-and-so emergency room, you just blew a .29 BAC, so I have to take you to the detox center now." I stood up from the chair that they had me in, and the cop goes, "Hey wait, are you okay to walk?" And I threw my arm around his shoulder and bellowed out, "Walk? Hell, I'm driving, let's go." He was not amused, and he got a little rough with me, but about half the emergency room staff completely lost it. I eventually quit drinking and fighting, though it took me about 10 more years of failure before I hit that point. I worked at Target back in college in a stocking job where we had to be there at like 4 or 5 a.m. to unload trucks. One morning I overslept a bit and walked to the unpacking line about 10 minutes late eating a breakfast bar. The boss stormed over and started loudly berating me in front of everyone for being late. As he was going on, I was listening and taking bites of the bar without much expression, mainly because I was so damn tired. It finally bothered him that I was disrespectfully chewing during the yelling, and he stopped mid-sentence. He held out his hand and said, "Give me that damn thing." It just so happened that I only had one bite left, so I took it, handed him the wrapper, and said, "Thanks," with a mouthful of food. He paused and then started laughing at the ridiculous response to his ranting. Young male traveling with a bunch of other males, Border Patrol, we were being searched for substance smuggling. The Border Patrol agent says, "You know I have the authority to cavity search you." And I say, somehow, without skipping a beat, "I mean, sure, you might, but neither of us would enjoy it and you wouldn't find anything. Off the hook. No fingers in this butt." A couple of months ago, my now ex-friend was telling me all the things that were wrong with me, and she finished it with, "And at least I don't have to wear makeup to look pretty." I was so fed up with her crap, so I responded, "Well, at least I'm capable of looking pretty." She was speechless, and I felt like such a badass because this was the first time I ever stood up to her. Back in high school, I was a slow, fat kid. For PE, we'd jog about 1 kilometer to the beach, have a swimming lesson, then jog back. I was the last one back to the school grounds, and the teacher was standing at the gate. He told me that because I was too slow, he was going to lock the gate, and I'd have to jog to the next one 200 meters away. I said that I'd consider him locking me out of the school grounds to be a suspension and to just go home. He let me in straight away. Kinda wished he'd tried calling my bluff so I could have followed through and just gone home. I was accused of being passive-aggressive. I replied, "Which part sounded passive? I don't ever want to come across as passive." I think a lot of people incorrectly label active aggression with passive aggression, and while I don't think either of those are usually warranted or appropriate, I do appreciate calling out the distinction. Although it does have to be said that your way of doing it does ironically come across as passive aggression, and now I have a headache. I'm a writer and I do a bit of stand-up comedy as well. As such, people tend to introduce me to new people as a comedian and writer, stuff like that. So I was outside a bar smoking with a friend of a friend. He then introduced me to one of his friends. His friend was dressed like Liam Gallagher from Oasis and seemed to exude a bit of a cocky, sneery manner. The introduction went thusly. My friend said, "Mr. Gallagher, this is John. He's a comedian." Mr. Gallagher looked me up and down. "Comedian, huh? Does that mean you think you're funny?" I answered, "No, it means everyone else does." I literally don't know where it came from. I didn't even think about that response, it just came out. And it's hands down the greatest thing I've ever said. At work at a company meeting, someone was presenting something cool that they volunteered to work on and finished. They then explained things they thought they could do better in a self-depreciating way, and a bunch of other people started railing into his work with petty criticism. It was definitely good work though, and a thought just hit me, so I blurted out, "Sometimes done is the best feature." A bunch of people laughed and then the criticism stopped. People gave him kudos and we moved on. Not really badass, I guess, but I was surprised this thought somehow came out fully formed, like it was some phrase I've been saying for decades. I guess I was just realizing how many people don't finish anything they start, so done suddenly seemed like a pretty damn good feature. Give the man some credit for finishing the damn thing. I was in an acting class in college and we were doing a scene where a couple was having a big drawn-out fight. Multiple pairs went through the scene and I'd studied it pretty hard so I knew all the lines. We're about halfway through our performance when my partner clearly forgets what her line is. And because everyone's doing that scene, they could tell she had forgotten as well. Her next line was, "Well, I'm sorry I asked." I'm not usually a quick thinker on my feet, but I just filled the second or two of awkward silence with, "I bet you're sorry you asked, huh?" and continued on with my lines. Not overly badass per se, but the class and professor loved it and they all laughed. Probably the only quick-witted thing I've ever done in my life. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. There was this one extremely attractive girl in my Comms 101 class in college. One day for a project where we interviewed other students, I was partnered with her. We ended up not finishing our questions in class, so I asked her if I could meet her somewhere to finish interviewing her. She said yes. Fast forward to the next day, I meet her after her dance group finishes rehearsal. I knock through the last few questions, and the final one, which I ask is, "What do you perceive the future to hold?" And she replies, "I don't even know what I'm having for dinner tonight. I have no idea what the future holds." So I say, "Well, if you don't know what you're having for dinner, do you want to have dinner with me?" She laughed, said yes, and though we only hooked up that night, I still look back on that day as one of the best dating stories I've had yet. I work at a bookstore and a customer asked me, "How often do the periodicals come out?" I deadpanned, "Periodically," and he asked to speak to my manager. Worth it. I used to work in a bookstore. Sarcastic answers to dumb questions were the best. The worst was a customer who asked, "Where is your non-fiction section?" "Oh, what topic are you looking for? We have lots of non-fiction." "Just your regular non-fiction. Biographies, history, computers, gardening? Just regular non-fiction." "Okay. You see that sign over there that says fiction? The entire rest of the store." Yes, I had amazing job security to pull that one. Kind of a proud moment for me. I was always really shy in school, had very few friends, was bullied a lot. My mum passed away when I was 14 and I kept it to myself, not wanting sympathy or more bullying for it. Someone found out, I'm not sure how. They then said in one of our mutual classes that I should just die like my stupid mum did. The whole class was shocked. Even the teacher was like a deer in the headlights. I immediately got up to leave, but before I left I turned to her, got up close and said, "I've seen what cancer does to people. It hurts, and I would never wish that on anyone, not even you." And I turned and walked out. A lot of people gave me some respect for the fact that I stood up for myself, although people then knew my mum had died, which wasn't great. I ended up leaving school a few months later anyways, but I was glad that I stood up for myself. Me and my girlfriend at the time were having a discussion about her going back to school. She kept putting it off every semester, and one day she got angry at me trying to tell her to actually go back, not just talk about it. And she yelled, "Rome wasn't built in a day," and I responded, "Yeah, but it was built." And a decade later, I still think of that. She did end up going back to school, got her master's even. She's married now, with twins. Just a real butthole. We had an overly dramatic neighbor who always claimed she was sick and dying. My mum came to see my kids in the middle of battling stage 4 lung cancer. The neighbor pulled her over. "Hi Rita, so glad to see you. Did Jason tell you that I'm dying?" My mum looked right at her, smiled and said, "Me too, dear, but not today." Never more proud of her. At a party a few years back, someone stole my friend's purse. Her boyfriend found the guys who took it and got it back for her. But he was still in an angry, drunken rage and was continuing to escalate the situation when he was well outnumbered. My friend finds me and says, "Look, I'm afraid he's about to get into a fight. I need your help. Please stop him." I stood up and told her, "I can't promise you I can stop him from fighting, but I can promise you I won't let him lose," before walking off to find him. Ultimately, no fight actually broke out, and I didn't realize that I'd basically said a cheesy one-liner until well after the fact when my friend told me how intense that line was. I didn't mean for it to sound so dramatic, I just wanted to let her know that I wouldn't let him get his butt kicked. I didn't mean to make it sound like I was about to demolish 3 guys by myself like I'm some sort of action hero. I think this would have been even funnier if you'd gone and got destroyed by the 3 guys. From your friends' perspectives, all of this confident bravado, a completely badass line followed by the beatdown of a century complete with crying and pant-wetting. Classic comedy. Glad it didn't come to that, though. Well, I don't know about badass, but years ago I worked at Hard Rock Cafe, and we often had pre-shift server meetings outdoors on a patio. And while my boss was droning on about us selling more overpriced plastic cups, I was staring off at the spinning globe on top of the building that said, "Save the planet" on it. I interrupted my boss by blurting out, "If Hard Rock is trying to save the planet, why do we waste so much on paper?" Which was really directed at my managers, who had a hard-on for printing out stupid memos. They somehow didn't realize it was about them specifically and passed the comment up the food chain, which ended up resulting in the entire company changing the payroll system to paperless globally. As a reward, I was given a pin shaped like a light bulb that said "Bright Idea" on it. Thanks, I guess. A guy pushed my 5-year-old daughter at the fish store and she started crying. I said, "Go wait with mummy, daddy might be going to jail again." When he heard me say that, he ran out of the store. I've never been to jail before. This one had a little setup, but I think it's funny enough to share. At a family vacation, my grandmother was giving me grief for not remembering her birthday. I've never been good with birthdays. After telling me it was the password to her iPhone, she'd wanted me to take a picture with it, which is why I needed the password. While she was distracted, I opened up the settings, changed her password to my birthday, and then set her phone down. Cue 15 minutes later, she's trying to get into her phone and it's not working. Suspecting mischief, she grumpily asks me if I've changed the password to her phone in front of our entire family. I admit that I did. "Well, what is it?" she asked impatiently. "It's my birth date." She sat there in stunned silence for 15 minutes not being able to remember my birthday before our family exploded laughing. It was a good time. A friend of mine was giving me crap while we were all bowling. Off the cuff, I yelled at him, "You're adopted. Your parents don't even like you." He laughed because, friends. Like 3 hours later, it hit me and I turned around and said, "Holy crap, dude, you are adopted." I'd completely forgot. "I'm so sorry, dude," which he thought made the whole situation even funnier. I actually said nothing. I was on my motorcycle in traffic on a wet overpass with short jersey walls. Guy behind me was driving a bit too fast and slammed on his brakes, sliding into me, but no damage, as he was going slow enough to touch and push me about 5 feet before finally coming to a stop. The angle had me going straight forward so I didn't fall. Had it been much faster, I would have been thrown over the edge to my death. So obviously I was, well, not happy. I turned off the engine, got off the bike, slowly walked over to the driver that hit me. It was only a few feet, and when he saw me coming to him, he furiously started raising his manual window, so I could just see him struggling to pump the winder. When I got there, I just knocked on his window, pointed at him, turned around, and walked away. He looked terrified. I didn't think about it until later. A guy you just hit in a car wearing a black helmet, with shaded visor, black heavy thick jacket, black heavy riding pants, road-crafted jacket and pants, black thick and metal-studded gloves, and black leather boots knocks on your window and points at you for being a supreme idiot. I had no idea. Wanted to give him a bit of mouth, but then to tell him I was okay and take a second to verify my bike was as well. I was eating McDonald's with a few friends and I started choking. The only thing I managed to say in the whole ordeal was, "I'm McChoking." A long time ago, I was walking down a side street in a medium-sized town with my girlfriend. A car was parked ahead, with the front of the car facing us as we approached. I could see 2 kids, maybe in their late teens, and I could instantly tell they were likely going to say something as my girlfriend was rather attractive. As soon as we came up next to them, I heard, "Hey baby, ditch the zero and come hang with the hero." I could feel my blood boil, but I kept my cool and calmly said, "Sorry buddy, I'm not gay, and don't call my girlfriend a zero." The guy's friends started laughing at him, and my girlfriend made a sarcastic crying face, then we both started to laugh. When I was 7, some girls were bullying me at school. I'd just learned the word mutual. One of the bullies said, "We don't like you," and I said, "The feeling's mutual," and walked off. I'm 37 now, and I still remember that. I was doing a university project, had to do a large presentation in front of a group of maybe 50 or 60 other students about a possible business of manufacturing an education toy for kids. It was a bit of a train wreck as no one else in the group had rehearsed or even read the script. As with all presentations, they asked for questions at the end and I stepped up to answer questions. There was one guy at the back that always asked awkward things like, "What if someone were to injure themselves and sue you?" or "Have you factored in matching employees' pensions?" It was meant to be a fun project for first-year students. They weren't expecting tons of detail. When it came to asking questions, I volunteered to answer them. The guy opened right away, asking awkward questions, but he had misjudged just how much work I'd done on the details. I asked the lecturer hosting the session if I could load up my spreadsheet, and he allowed it. That's when the guy realized he'd just asked the wrong guy. I'd made an automatic spreadsheet that could work out how many people were needed, how many machines, what hours people could work, rolling production over 24 hours, and overlapping shifts to ensure it all worked at maximum efficiency. Add to that, it worked out costs, complying to the law exactly, including pension contributions, tax amounts, holidays, time off work due to illness, insurance, rent, and more. When it came to asking his group questions, I asked him every single thing he had overlooked legally, like time off for work, pay increases, stuff like that. On the way out, the other groups gave me a smile as it had shut him right up. About 25 years ago, I was in grade 9 and my parents bought me a pair of Air Max. I'm a female, but I'd picked a pair of Air Max that were supposed to be for males because I preferred the color of the shoes. I was super pumped to get those shoes. We didn't have lots of money and it was a pretty extravagant purchase. Anyway, I was at our local shopping center and I ran into a group of guys I went to high school with. They were a real bunch of buttholes that thrived on dumping on other people. One of the guys had on the same pair of shoes as me and said to me, "Do you know you're wearing men's shoes?" To which I quickly replied, "Then why the frick are you wearing them?" The other guys peed themselves laughing and it still stands out in my mind after all these years. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.